pushed into another realm now that I've spent years of my life rewriting the prequels. When people, I've had it since then. A couple people say, "Oh, you like Star Wars?" And I just can't help but like laugh inside. Kind of.
When did it start for you? When did you discover Star Wars? What movie was it that you witnessed for the first time that started your love of the series that we know, this world, this universe?
That's such a great question. I love that. Because I grew up on Star Trek: The Next Generation, so
Oh yeah.
I was more of a Trekkie as a kid, and it was kind of a magical time, I guess. Not to get too rose-colored glasses about it, but it was this dead zone post Return of the Jedi, where I think in the culture people didn't realize how big Star Wars really was. It wasn't the legend that it became. It was more like, oh yeah, those movies, they were good, and
Oh really? For me it was a legend though. Return of the Jedi. I watched those movies over and over again as a kid.
but don't you think that there was a period in the culture where Star
It
Wars?
was never coming back, right? I mean, it was never coming back. There was no more Star Wars ever going to be on the silver screen again.
Oh really? You
That's what it was like for me. It was like, okay, you have those three movies, they're iconic,
Yeah, I
and
think
you're
I know what you
never
mean.
going to have any new Star Wars.
Yeah, there was a short period, I think, of people that are younger people, especially 90s kids. I don't think they'll ever relate to this. There was this period where Star Wars was not really in the culture outside of, you might see it on cable TV, but like the toys went away for a long time.
Mhm.
There was no merchandise. The merchandise just kind of trickled out and disappeared. And
I think there were comic books. I think Marvel was doing a comic book for a little while, and they
there,
passed it off to
there wasn't any
Dark
comic
Horse.
books
That's right.
until the mid 90s when Dark Horse got the license. So
Wow.
from the end of the Marvel Comics era, which, I think that was what, the late eight. They didn't have it for that long. It might have even ended in the 70s or late early 80s. And then for like, I would say like 10 years, there was no novels, no Star Wars comics. It didn't start up again until Heir to the Empire was published. I want to say 93, 94. And
Yeah.
and
God,
the
I remember when that
timeline,
book was published. I was like a junior in high school,
it was
and this kid that was bullied so badly had a copy of it, and I was like, "Dude, can I read that when you're done?" And he looked at me like I was freaking crazy. I didn't bully him, but other people did, and I was kind of a jock, so I wanted to read that book so bad. I went out and bought it immediately.
Wasn't that
The
book
series, anyway.
so amazing? It was
Yeah.
kind of magical because it was the only thing Star Wars out. It was new.
That was my first experience with the extended universe,
Yeah,
the Thrawn series.
it was only the second novel ever published outside of Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And Lucas, if you look at the timeline in retrospect, in hindsight, it's really fascinating that he planned all this stuff out to an amazing degree, which just makes the prequels all the more baffling how they were botched. But he clearly was waiting for CGI to mature, and he saw Jurassic Park and realized, oh, it's time now. And then he greenlit Heir to the Empire, and then he made the special editions, and then he went right into the prequels. So he
You mean
planned.
he destroyed the original films? He
Well,
didn't.
let's do the
The
special.
definition I attribute to that special edition is he destroyed my childhood.
I can tie
That's
that
what he
into
did.
to where I was going earlier with my background in Star Wars, because, as I said, I was more into Star Trek because I grew up with the Next Generation,
Yeah.
and then in the '90s, to me, it was a magical time as I kind of feel like I matured and grew into Star Wars.
Well, how did you feel about the special editions? Had you watched the
I'm
original
getting there.
trilogy up to that point, or were
Yeah.
you like,
I I I really fell in love with Star Wars at, I guess, the magical age. Again, not to get too uh, romantic about it or anything, but at like when I was 7 or 8, I didn't care that much. But when I think you're like 10, 11, 12, those films, I think, speak to you on a primordial level. And so I did not love Star Wars anymore. I don't think I ever loved it more than 96, 97 going into the special editions. So I got the VHS tapes when they were reissued in, I want to say, 95. I distinctly have vivid memories of getting to see them in widescreen for the very first time when Sci-Fi Channel aired them in widescreen, and it was like almost as good as seeing them in the theaters. Not quite, obviously, but it was magical to see them in widescreen. It's like half the movie was chopped off, and you get to
yeah,
see them for the first time. It was incredible.
television ratio? Yeah, I got
I
you.
remember recording those I had those tapes that I played over and over again, and they were hosted by Carrie Fisher and Billy D. Williams, and I had never seen them talk about the movies before then. So I loved those. And then the special editions, I when they first came out, I loved them.
Even the graphical and attunements that he made during the
I
for the
did.
movies.
I didn't like the Han shooting first, obviously, and nobody did. But I mostly loved overall. I love them, and a lot of that I think it was getting to see them in theaters for the first time. And over the
Yeah,
years, it's gotten to the point where I kind of hate the special editions, sort of. Um,
yeah, me
there's a
too.
few, there's a few
You
changes.
know, I'm the same way. When I saw those movies in the theater, I was like, dude, I was blown away. I saw Empire in the theater when I was a baby. I
Yeah.
saw Return of the Jedi with my father in the theater, but obviously I was a young 9 year old or something like that. But when the special editions came out, they were pretty magical. I was like, oh, dude, they're on the screen again. But they grew old fast.
Yeah, I thought to me, I guess I was like the key audience, the core audience for excuse me, the target audience for the special editions because I loved Star Wars and I wanted to see them on the big screen for the first time. And the idea that there was new stuff added was just
Yeah,
so
it's exciting,
exciting
right? It
and
was
enticing
exciting.
that the universe is going to be a little bit bigger and that there's going to be things added that were just technologically impossible, when the originals were made.
Mind blowing in
Yeah.
97 or whatever it
So
was. And then
the guy,
98 and then 99. And then what do
yeah,
you have?
yeah, it
The
was nice.
prequels start, right? The
Start,
prequels are announced and they're coming out. And it's like,
right.
dude,
I remember this is pretty obscure, but I remember in 1996, before I even heard about the special editions were coming out, I was at the Museum of Science and Industry, and I was on watching their OmniMax Dome, and it was a little documentary about ILM. It was about special effects, and there
mhm,
was footage that they were shooting. They were shooting. It was behind the scenes footage of them shooting the special edition, uh, basically the desert stuff with the stormtroopers, and they were talking about how they got Marines to don these stormtrooper outfits because they wanted to get the most hardy guys to go out into the desert where it's insanely hot. And
yeah, miserable.
yes, and it blew my mind because I hadn't heard anything about the special editions. I don't know if they had even been officially announced. I don't know if people can even relate to like the mid 90s when the internet was just in its infancy and you didn't hear about this stuff. It was you had to it was so on the margins and so obscure, like you didn't really hear major announcements. It was just amazing to see that on this screen. It was like, this is how I find out that they're making the special editions, that they're working on.
Yeah, what do you didn't hear anything until it was either a commercial on TV or
Exactly.
maybe one of your friends said, "Hey, did you hear about something completely wrongheaded?"
Exactly.
And
And the only way
how
to
old were
know
you
that,
when the original when the special editions came out?
well, like I said, I was like, well, I can tell exactly. I was like 14, I think, when
14. So you're like the perfect age for it.
exactly, yeah. I just wanted to say that like I loved the Jabba scene that they added with the CG, and then slowly
Ugh.
over time I grew to kind of
That was such a horrible scene. Oh my God. That really does speak to
your
how willing you are to
yeah.
appreciate what's being developed, right? Because you see that, you're like, oh, it's okay because it's Star Wars. I love it because it's Star Wars. And then you watch it 20, 40 times or however many times. I don't
Well,
know.
at the time, actually, for the longest time, I thought it was perfect in that it tied A New Hope into Return of the Jedi and made it
Yeah.
more of a cohesive trilogy, and I loved that. But the CG did not hold up.
Age well at
Even
all.
even
Yeah,
the Blu-ray
totally.
redo did not. It still doesn't. It's like they would have to redo it every 4 or 5 years to get it to. And even then, I've kind of been convinced by I think fans from your generation that point out that this scene accomplishes nothing in terms.
Nothing there. I was watching a really interesting YouTube video a couple days ago about the editing of the original series and how the original copy of it was so bad that when George Lucas's wife came in
Oh,
and
right,
it
the rough cut.
all apart,
Yeah.
she took out that scene with Jabba because it was redundant. All
Right.
that information had been given
Yes.
just a couple scenes before, so they
And
did not need that
I have
there.
to begrudgingly admit that your generation is totally right. That narratively that scene achieves nothing. And then I heard someone argue that it works better if you don't know what Jabba looks like, and then it builds it up to that
Yeah.
in the reveal for Jedi. And I had to just go, man, you guys are right. This
Yeah.
it just doesn't it
And
doesn't
you can't
really.
do justice. I mean, I'm sorry, computer animation for some reason does not cut it when it comes to that what do they call it? The physical effect of the puppet, the gigantic thing. It was so fantastically done.
Yeah, I agree. The
It was artistry. I
magic
mean,
at all. It just it doesn't work. And
it doesn't work.
yeah, I totally agree. And that kind of goes right into the prequels as far as bad CGI goes. And ILM. Just the other day, I was thinking about how, because I was rewatching Rogue One ahead of the Last Jedi, and the CGI in that, I don't think there's a bad shot in Rogue One, and
No.
it blew my mind that that's also ILM. Because I was rewatching part of the prequels, so I was referencing it, and there's so many terrible effect shots. It's just it should be embarrassing, and I can't believe that they're both ILM movies.
No, it's very interesting. A thought just occurred to me though. If they hadn't have done the original series or the prequels, we would not have what we have with the 3 new movies that have just come out. And they do seem seamless. They don't affect you in the same way that the original malignancies do.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, there was a maturing with the other computer graphics. I
Yeah.
mean, you have that horrible scene with Jabba that obviously doesn't cut mustard, but without that scene, you would not have the seamlessness of the computer animation that you do within A New Hope, or not New Hope, The Force Awakens, or Rogue One, or even The Last Jedi, where you don't notice it.
Yeah, I wonder if the new Disney films are just have a much bigger budget, or if it's how much of it is the maturity of CGI and how much of it is a bigger budget. Because I really think the prequels, I think Lucas was experimenting with trying to keep the budgets down, especially when you see some of the worst shots, some of the really rough shots that are clearly a mix of a really nice model and a really awful CG thing added in some of the backgrounds. I mean, just you could go through that frame by frame and just
It's interesting. I don't know how much money he put into the redos of the original series, but the budget for episode 1 was $115 million.
Mhm. And I think the
And
budget for like The Force Awakens is like 200 or 300 million. So I think that shows.
I mean, yeah, they can make $1 billion off it now, which I think they did.
Yeah.
The Force Awakens
Well,
budget was between 175 and $200 million. I mean, it's
prequels are
significantly increased, but I
as,
don't know because that's like 20 years ago money, right? I mean, obviously inflation affected that.
as terrible as the prequels were. If you look at pure box office numbers, they are shockingly successful. They made
Yes.
an insane amount of money. Phantom Menace is still one of the highest grossing films of all time, and I sincerely believe that if those films had been great, that they would have shattered all those records. Because look how great they did, and they were so terrible. Imagine.
Well, that's a great segue, man. Let's talk about how we could make the Phantom Menace better. I
The
mean,
first thing I
that's
would
actually how I discovered you, is that not only are you a
say,
connoisseur of Star Wars, but man, you have got a lot to say, and I want to hear it. What do you think about the Phantom Menace? First off, as an appetizer.
um, well, yeah, that immediately makes me think of like seeing it in theaters for the first time. Um, Still on a like a special edition high because I still liked the special edition.
Hmm.
Although now recently I can't watch the special editions. The 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 voice, they gave a new voice to to Boba Fett, the New Zealand actor who played Django. Now when that ruins The Empire Strikes Back for me. And then the Jedi rock scene in Return of the Jedi is it really hurts to put those in those Blu-rays and realize, wow, this is unwatchable. Um,
I've
although
downloaded the original versions just so I can watch Star Wars and not have to be affected by it.
I didn't think that would happen to me where I need to see the fan cuts for me to enjoy Star Wars, but it has did you see the Empire Strikes Revisited?
I don't think so.
Empire Strikes Back Revisited just came out, and that's my new favorite cut of the movie.
Why?
It's like the special edition, but made by a fan who actually cares and is passionate about all those little details, and that, and the fact that there's actually better effects work done by this one guy working alone by himself in the UK. Well, not totally by himself. Actually, if you read the credits, you realize he's got a whole network of fans helping him on the internet, and there's actually better effects work in that he went through and replaced every matte painting with another
Wow.
really fancy model.
I
Show
just heard recently that the AT-ATs in the forefront of the screen were these really awesome stop motion puppets. And then if you if you fall back into the scene, the ones in the foreground or farther back were just cardboard cutouts, barely with any detail at all. I mean,
in
I
Empire.
love how the fans get involved. I mean, there's a whole universe of fan fiction out there. There are people that are re-editing these films into something they think is more watchable.
Yeah. Well, the
It's
Revisited project. Did you see either Revisited, A New Hope Revisited, or Empire Revisited?
no, I don't know if I downloaded something. I might have watched something, but I
Definitely seek those
didn't
out.
watch it. Okay,
It,
revisit it.
yes, exactly. It's like this the special editions if they were good. If they're made by a fan, they definitely have the choices he's making are clearly the work of a dedicated fan, and that also is help. I think it was definitely a source of inspiration as far as my rewrite goes, as far as ambition, because you see that and you're like, wow, a fan can outdo ILM. That's mind blowing.
And the graphics. What about the story?
He
Does the revisit actually affect the story at all, or do they keep pretty much the plot as is?
They are not. They don't mess with any of the plot of the story. It's very loyal.
It's a great
It's
story.
really just fixing some. It's almost entirely continuity fixes and effects fixes. And in terms of story, it's much more loyal than the special editions, I would say.
It's very interesting. So
Going back to the Phantom Menace,
yes,
I remember seeing it for the first time. I have vivid memories of the opening, the blare of the horns, the fanfare with the Star Wars logo,
yeah.
and then the opening crawl. And I remember thinking, it's orange. That's not Star Wars. It's supposed to be yellow. And then the movie starts, and it's very slow beginning. And I remember, you just take it in the first time you see it. And I mean, even the new Star Wars movies, it's just kind of, you just take it in the first time. But the thing that sticks with me most about the Phantom Menace is that had already bought tickets to see it again later that day with my dad, who couldn't see it at the midnight. And so we went to go see it later that night. And I fell asleep very early on into the movie, and that to me is my most vivid memory about the Phantom Menace. Is that was my first clue that this movie's not any good. I never
The
thought
second time you saw it, or the first time you saw it?
the second time I saw it, I fell asleep, and I never thought that would happen at a Star Wars movie. The
Yeah.
second time I ever get to see it in theaters.
I have to admit, when I saw Phantom Menace, I loved it. I had no problems with it when I saw it,
Wow, really?
but I could never watch it again, like all the way through without cringing.
Oh,
Without cringing.
yeah. The first time I think you just kind of take it in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the best way to put it because you do kind of let it just wash over you as a
Yeah,
fan. You're like, I was like, oh, it's Star Wars, the fanfare, just into it. And then I'm reading the scroll going, I thought the beginning was great because you had Jedis and they were doing Jedi things that they never did in the original trilogy. And it was interesting. But again,
that reminds me of the trailer, and I have even more vivid memories of seeing that first trailer for the first time and playing it on my computer. And we had this awesome subwoofer, and the subwoofer was cranked, and to just hear for the very first time in my life, hear a lightsaber move with the subwoofer blaring, and you can really, it is like visceral, and it's a memory I'll never forget. And it felt so Star Warsy, and like that trailer, I enjoyed the hell out of that trailer. I love that trailer way more than I loved the Phantom Menace movie.
yeah.
Although the trailer,
So
the
we're watching Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. The first act is playing. And the first act is the Jedis are going to negotiate a settlement between the Trade Federation and the planet of Naboo, right?
yeah, trade negotiations. I mean, that's really what the Phantom.
I can't help but crack up. It's horrible. It's horrible. In retrospect, it's horrible.
I'd love to see them
So
debate and negotiate some. Let's get some diplomacy in here. Star diplomacy. That's what it's called, right?
let's have a bunch of people sitting around. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But tell me, I mean, how do you want to handle this?
Well, as far as like taking you through the whole history, I would have to jump ahead to let me look it up. I think it was like when did the first Plinkett review come out? I want to say 2010.
Plinkett?
The Red Letter Media reviews, the Plinkett Star Wars reviews. Are you familiar with those?
I don't know. Maybe I've watched it, but I've never referred to it as the Plinkett.
Uh,
Um,
well, it's usually referred to as the Plinkett Phantom Menace review or the Red Letter Media Phantom Menace review.
I'm looking at it right now, and I do not see an actual date that it was potentially published. 3 years ago? Maybe less than, more than. I don't
Way
know.
more than that. I think it hit the internet um, either 2010 or 2011. I want to say.
Okay.
Um, the YouTube is dated 2012, but anyway, I would say that this whole thing really kicked off when his reviews started coming out. Um, after because I remember Revenge of the Sith came out, and that to me kind of uh, it really saved face. It really salvaged. At least the prequels weren't a total utter disaster, because that was the first one that I felt actually felt like a Star Wars movie. The first two did not feel like Star Wars at all to me. At least Revenge of the Sith at least kind of feels like a Star Wars movie for all its flaws. Um, so it was more of a just something that kind of was in the back of my mind. I've always even before the prequels came out, I think all the fans, most of the fans probably had some sort of uh idea or that their imaginations run wild as to what could these films possibly be. And I remember I didn't want to out try and outthink it. I just wanted to enjoy them films. I think so many
Hmm.
people probably had that perspective. But then once the first two came out, I definitely started thinking about, what should this have been? But not investing that much time into it until a few years after Revenge of the Sith came out, I started thinking of you have more time to think about it. But what really kicked it into high gear was when these Plinkett reviews came out, and then I started writing down. I think at some point, either right before or right after his Revenge of the Sith review came out. I want to say before his Revenge of the Sith review came out because I remember waiting. There was quite a long wait between his clones and Sith review coming out, and I think I started writing down notes and ideas right before his Sith review came out, and then his Sith review came out, and then I remember just slowly over the I think his Sith review came out, I want to say 2013, something like that. So that was 4 years ago. And just over those 4 years, just I spent more and more time writing down more. Slowly, as time went on, I would write down more and more notes and think about it more and more. And it kind of snowballed. It's really quite amazing. If you want to talk about creative process, I was kind of amazed at
Now,
how,
what you're talking about is actually remaking the movies, rewriting these movies into something that was more appealing to you, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
the, yes, I always wrote them from a perspective of, what if these movies weren't just good but great? And I want these films to match up perfectly with the original trilogy as best as they possibly can. Which why would you ever want anything else than something that matches the original trilogy that is completely loyal to the established lore?
You know what's really interesting to me, not to interrupt you because I'm really good at that. I constantly interrupt because I'm rude. But I'm thinking about this. When I was a kid growing up, before the original series were reworked the way they were, we made excuses. You know what I mean? We built up the lore to cover the holes in the movies themselves. And then for some reason in the 21st century, it's not making excuses for the films anymore, is it? It's saying it could have been better if they had made different choices. Am I on the right path with that?
um,
You
I
think?
I don't know. I think that's
Star Trek, the original series, is a great example, right? If you watch that series, it's complete and utter crap visually, right? I mean, they've got horrible science fiction plot holes, just bad graphics, but people love it and they make excuses for it. And Doctor Who's another one where people make excuses for how it could work if it was, different. Why is it the original series or the prequels get reworked and excuses not made for them?
Well, I think I would just disagree. Is the people who love the prequels, I've encountered many a fan who, uh, especially while I've been working on this, you see more and more of it. There's a whole generation of '90s kids who grew up with the prequels, and they totally will bend the universe to.
Make it work.
Yes, they all have their own headcanon, especially in regards to Yoda.
Head canon. It's a
Yeah.
great term for it.
Yes, yeah. There's so many great slang terms on the internet, especially fan fiction. They have their own language, really. Um, yeah, yeah. The one that's really kind of baffling to me as an original trilogy fan is the the headcanon to try and explain Yoda, how Yoda was just completely ruined by the prequel.
Completely different than the original trilogy
Yeah,
Yoda.
if you want to talk about a difference, I would say that the difference is that uh, there's good headcanon to kind of like, yeah, you can come up with like logical explanations to make classic Star Trek work and make Star Wars work a little bit better. Although I would argue there's not really that much to fix. But in terms of prequels, you have to really move mountains to make those movies make any goddamn
You
sense.
really do have to delete things. I mean, that's basically what it is. You have to remove
Yeah, I would argue that
splinters.
as it relates to the original trilogy, I think the prequels are completely broken. They just simply do not work, and the people who try to make them work are really engaging in what I would say is turd polishing. You can't polish a turd,
Yeah,
and so many prequel rewrites are really an exercise in turd polishing.
yeah,
And that's the if you want to talk about like what sets mine apart, mine is clearly a page one rewrite. I've kept almost nothing from the original prequels, and in fact I even got some comments from people who say that you should really just get rid of literally everything. There's like it's tiny little things that I've kept, and they argued or suggested that I even cut those. And
So is it easier to talk about what you did keep in your trilogy, or in Phantom Menace, or do you even call it Phantom Menace? Do you have a
yeah,
title for your first movie?
I've settled. Well, I wouldn't say I've settled. I have a title for mine. I'm not totally in love with it. I'm open to maybe if I can come up with the best title that I've come up with so far for my rewrite is Scion of the Force, which somebody mentioned. That sounds a little bit like a fan fiction title, and I agree. It a little bit does, but I like it because it's one of the best that I've come up with, and it actually really, really plays into the themes. One of the big central concepts of my rewrite is what is Anakin's origin, what is his backstory. That's a big that's one of the things that I think I've accomplished best, that turned out best in my rewrite. That's the central mystery of is Anakin's exact origins and backstory. So in terms of that, I think it's a good title, but it's actually incredibly hard to come up with a better title than the Phantom Menace. Although the Phantom Menace, yeah, it's not a good title.
So he's an heir of the Force, or a successor, offspring
Uh,
of it. I guess he is an offspring of it, according to the way George Lucas kind of wrote the lore to it, right?
yes, mine. My rewrite kind of plays into that a lot more heavily. It's only implied in Revenge of the Sith that perhaps Palpatine created Anakin. Although mine, it's pretty well. I haven't finished writing Revenge of the Sith yet, but it's probably going to be. It's more obvious that that is what happened. Is that Anakin was created by Darth Sidious, and so the idea is that he was literally created by the Force. So Scion of the Force is in reference to that.
How old is Anakin to start your movie?
That's a great question. I've narrowed it down to he would have to be somewhere between 15 and 19. 19 at the oldest, 15 at the youngest.
At
Uh,
15, the actor could age with the films.
well, it's any of those ages. Any actor that could play teenager could be cast. Um, and yeah, I wouldn't want it to be too overly specific as far as his exact age. especially if you were making these films, you wanted to leave it a little bit vague, especially with the casting and stuff. But yeah, he definitely starts as a teenager, and I was actually, I wish I had written this down. I wish I could pull up my notes. I was trying to figure out this recently while I was working on this. It would be the exact timeline of between episodes 1 and 2. My rewrite would be like three, but basically about 3 years between 1 and 2. So if he's 15, he would be 19 or 18. Yeah, it'd be like about 18, 19 in episode 2. And he'd be like 20 in episode 3. And then if he was like 19, 19 seems a bit high, like 18 in episode 1, then he would be 21 in episode 2 and 22 in episode 3.
It's young still, though, right?
Yes, very young, but it's kind of necessitated by the timeline. It's kind of dictated by the story.
It's about the same as it was in New Hope to Empire Strikes Back, to about 3 years.
Yes, exactly. It does seem really young, but yeah, Luke was 18, and Luke and Leia were both 18, and
He seems so much older in Empire Strikes Back too, but I think that's just because the actor had a horrible accident.
Mark Hamill wasn't 18, but Carrie Fisher was 19 when they shot A New Hope, which is pretty amazing.
Young. So your character is 15 to 19 years old, and where do you start your movie at?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Is how should I describe my rewrite?
Let's do it from the scroll. I mean, do you have a scroll?
I do have a opening scroll. I think it'd be smarter to start with the notes. Like when you first saw my post, I assume you did not see the earlier post from last year. I assume you saw it on Sci-Fi Writers.
So Sci-Fi Writer, yeah, I go there all the time to look for the newest writing challenge, and just happen to see your post. It's like, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, about a day or two after I posted that, I went back and I realized that my post is now the highest post on sci-fi writing history.
I think I caught it when it was at like 19 points or something. Really not, for that sub, that was like really high, because it doesn't think anybody upvotes anything on that sub. But I was like, interesting. And then, yeah, what is it right now? Is it 3 figures, or is it still like high 2 figures?
In terms of upvotes?
Yeah.
Posts? I haven't checked in a while. I think it was like 60 something when I checked it. Let's see. Sci-fi. Oh yeah, it's 72 right now.
Which is really good. I mean, if you look at the sub, there's nothing on here that's over
that's nothing, but considering the size of the sub, it's actually it's not bad. It's higher than, it's like double the next highest.
And also, I will say this. I mean, I don't click on anything on this sub either, except for the writing challenge, because I submit something every single month, or that they host it. But your post actually called to me my comprehensive rewrite of the entire Star Wars prequel trilogy. Years in the making. Years. As a hobby. I mean, basically, you have devoted lots of time to this.
Yes, actually, it was sometime, I don't know, in the past year or two, I realized, wow, I really have spent a crazy amount of time thinking about every little detail in in the entire Star Wars 6-part saga.
This basically is how I feel too. There's a user, Officer BLK Iron Tarkus. He says he almost wishes he had not read it because it's too good. It pains him to know he will never see this, and that mirrors my sentiments exactly. It's like, why did you do this to me? Now I knew the movie sucked. I mean, I was totally about them not being good. There was nothing I could do about it. But then I read your treatment. I'm like, I want to watch that right now.
Yeah,
there's no way that can be messed up.
Those are the two quotes from there were comments on the original post from last year, and they're probably my favorite responses or reviews of my rewrite. Is this first one from Real Life Lucas that oh no, wait, no, that's right, that's a different quote. This one from Ghost in the user Ghost in the Corner says, quote, "This almost makes me kind of sad. I love this. It will never be." And then in response to that Tarkus that you just quoted, where he said, "I almost wish I hadn't read this because it's just too good. It pains me to know I will never see this." Yeah, I really love those those comments. They really have been really inspiring and encouraging to me.
It's frustrating though, isn't it, too? I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this already before we got on. What you're hoping to do with this treatment. And of course, I'm going to put the link to the subreddit or to the post in the show notes so people can go there and read it too. But we were talking about how would you actually get this going? I mean, obviously they can't go back in and they can't delete most of the movie and refilm it because it's way too late. You'd have to actually start all over again. You'd have to reboot these movies to do it. And I'm looking at the way fans reacted to the Force, the Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way they're going to accept a total forget about these movies. We're going to redo them moment in the cinema history
Well, I think
of the
that the
series.
90s kids who grew up with the prequels would have that reaction. But that just makes me think about how fractured the Star Wars fan base has become.
Yeah,
I've been reading the reviews to The Last Jedi, and the people who really, really loved The Force Awakens, they really don't like The Last Jedi. And I find it deeply frustrating because I loved The Last Jedi so much.
yeah, me too. I
Uh,
thought it was really great, but I also like The Force Awakens too. But I think we talked about that already too, where you let a movie wash over you because you obviously are a fan. You go there
yeah,
to experience it, and
I've
you
been reading
leave going,
responses.
"Oh, that was
Yeah, I've been
wonderful."
reading these responses to The Last Jedi, and mostly I just feel like I just want to watch it again. I just, I don't want to pick. I really don't want to pick it apart. And so many people are picking it apart. And
Picking it apart, yeah, just tearing it to shreds. And they did it with The Force Awakens too. When I left that movie, I was like, "Oh, I love that. That was pretty damn good."
Mhm.
And then I started reading other people's comments about it. I'm like, "Huh, they're all right. That's true. All this stuff is actually quite accurate."
Yeah.
And they ruined the movie for me. It's like, now I can't watch it. But you know the Han Solo scene where he gets introduced on the ship and they have that whole chase thing with the computer animated monster or whatever. God, I wish that wasn't in the movie so badly. That's my only issue with it.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
I, d- I did not mind that. What are they called? The raptors. What are they called?
something weird. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I
Yeah.
just don't think it did anything for the movie.
I didn't
But
bother me, but I think part of that is because in rewriting the prequels, one of the things you take note of is there's really a list of things that are required for every Star Wars film, and one of them is you need a creature. There's a creature in every single Star Wars film, and
Rancor in Return of the Jedi, you have the trash compactor thingy, right?
yeah, the Dianoga in
And then you have the
there's the
abominable snowman thing in Empires.
Wampa in Empire, and the prequels, of course, have all that. And my it's really fascinating. My episode one rewrite organically had a monster has a monster. You can actually read the treatment right now, and you can see where that the monster shows up.
Where is the monster in The Last Jedi?
Oh, the Last Jedi was just wall to wall creatures. There was tons of creatures.
But we're talking about like a monster that comes up and there's actually a scene where you defeat it or survive it.
Well, I would say that the creatures in Last Jedi are the horse like things that they ride through Canto Bright. Bite, Canto Bite, and they aren't really monsters. They're it's inverted. They're not monsters. They're heroes, and
Humans are monsters to them. What about in the Force Awakens is that stupid thing that I can't
right.
stand. And
Yeah.
what about the I guess Darth Vader would be the monster in Rogue One,
No,
unless there was another one.
The monster in Rogue One is the mind reading, mind sucking monster that Forrest Whitaker pulls out. Um, and a lot of fans have pointed out that that scene doesn't go anywhere. But from a writer's perspective, it makes perfect sense to me why that's in the movie is because the writers felt like they had to not break the formula. And the part of that formula is you need a monster, but they should have known better because the standalone stories don't need to be that rigid in its story structure. So it didn't. That scene really didn't. It either didn't need to be there or it needed to pay off. And the big problem is that they said it like will make you go crazy, and then I forget what that character's name is, and then he doesn't go crazy. He just recovers. He's kind of just dazed for a couple scenes. Um, yeah, structurally it doesn't quite work. But hey, I love Rogue One. I don't want to crap all over.
Yeah, I liked it too. I felt again, I've only seen it once
I'm a
though.
big
I'll watch it again. So looking at your notes, the way that you have this broken down is your first step in fixing episode one would be scarier villains.
Yes, I'm glad you brought it back to that because that's what I wanted to talk about. Is how do I what's the best way to introduce someone to what's so special by my rewrite? There's a ton of prequel rewrites out there, and I would say first and foremost, I'm approaching this from a more of a writerly, nothing is sacred type perspective. I have no particular attachment to the prequels. I don't hold them as canon. As far as I'm concerned, they certainly have not earned that status at all. So when I first, one of the first things I did is I wrote down every single piece of concrete lore straight out of the original trilogy, and almost all of it is from Obi-Wan's speech in Obi-Wan's hut to Luke when they first when they first watch Leia's message on R2D2. That scene really crystallizes the lore of the entire universe. It's really an incredible scene. And I had to watch it so many times just in reference to rewriting this, and it's uh it's amazing how perfectly worded that scene is. If he had chosen, if George had chosen just slightly different wording, it really makes me wonder because it would change so much. So that's one of the first things I did. Um, so I my approach is definitely loyalty to the original trilogy. Um, and then I just started thinking about um, one of the best things that I noticed that I'd always been aware of problems with the films, but I never overanalyzed them. And the Plinkett reviews were all about really overanalyzing them almost to death. And that was hugely inspirational because he was articulating a lot of things uh, that I had only thought of in vague terms, and
Hmm.
so many of his deconstructions were like, "Oh yeah," or like I thought about that. I just didn't like think about it that much. I never really like, tried to describe it. And the one that really stands out in my mind is in the middle of his Clones review. He's talking about how, all right, now we have an action scene between there's a battle between clones versus droids, and we don't care about either side. There's no audience investment. There's no stakes. Who cares? It's just a bunch of robots versus disposable soldiers. There's no audience investment, and that really crystallized in my mind. Like, oh my god, yes, he's absolutely right. That's something that I was vaguely aware of, but I never really thought about until that moment. I
I
realized,
think
oh
they
right,
fixed that a little bit in the Clone Wars cartoon. Not that I've really delved
yeah,
deep into it, but
yeah.
they gave the clones a little bit more personality. So you can actually start cheering for them a little bit.
Yes,
Removing
there's a
the
lot.
mask gave them some individuality.
Yeah, you can tell. I haven't seen all of the Clone Wars, but you can tell that there's a lot of uh, there's a lot of heavy lifting by the writers in that show trying to fix.
Fix it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just to me is frustrating that there's so many hardcore fans of the Clone Wars cartoon, and yet from my perspective, it's just a lot of heavy-handed turd polishing. It just is. It's better than the prequels. I'll give you that. I'll give you guys that. But so much of what in writing this is me trying to look at it from a blank slate of like just I'm just shooting for utter perfection. Obviously it won't be perfect, but at least shoot for that and go for, what if these movies were great? What would they look like? What elements would they have?
And one of those is scarier villains. I mean, what would you do with the villains and Phantom Menace?
Well, it makes me think about how one of the things that I don't think people really sit back and stop and think about the way the original trilogy is constructed. But one of the reasons why it's so thrilling and so exciting is how utterly evil the villains are and how good the heroes are. And the heroes are total underdogs and the villains are super overpowered, and that creates such incredible drama. You're immediately invested right from the opening shot of A New Hope. You can see how just visually the story is being told that the Empire is that powerful. Their ships are just ginormous, and that, and then it just builds on that from there as far as like the legions of stormtroopers, that they just the scale and enormity of the Death Star.
Hmm.
And that is totally, utterly missing in the prequels.
Hmm.
So the
So you're not afraid of the Trade Federation
exactly.
and
Well,
those
yeah,
ridiculously comic droid things they have?
yeah, you're not really afraid of any. Yeah, the Confederacy of Independence, the Separatists. You're not afraid of the Separatists. You're not afraid of the Trade Federation. The droids are. That's one of the great things that Plinkett pointed out is the battle droids are just they oppose no threat. They're not scary at all. The Jedi, as Lucas said, they cut them down like butter. And yeah, there's no tension. And just one of the things that you, as a writer, you just have to, you're very aware of is heightening the tension. You're always looking for ways to heighten the tension. And from that perspective, the prequels are just, it's just wrong in terms of what
I
it.
always felt like Darth Maul was a fantastic villain. I
Yes,
really did.
except for Darth Maul. Darth Maul stands out head and shoulders above the rest of that movie as being totally what you would expect in a Star Wars movie.
When
It's
he kills not Mace Windu, when he kills
like engine.
yeah, it's like that's awesome. Now Obi-Wan's gonna face him and he's going to do something and escape, so that's our bad guy in every single movie, and he's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's going to be a showdown in the third movie, and it's going to be wonderful. It doesn't happen.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then it doesn't it doesn't happen. Yeah, that's one of the things that happens in my rewrite is I bring back Darth Maul, which the fans are already did that. They had Darth Maul come back with a robotic lower half, and that's been part of the expanded universe for years and years and years. And that's almost all the fans agree that that would have been so much better. And
So much better.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of the most blatantly obvious things about the original trilogy and the way it's constructed is Darth Vader hangs around because you get more. Empire Strikes Back is totally built around you getting more and more invested, personally invested in the characters, and particularly Luke versus Vader. And the reason why that movie works, the reason the ending works, is it's all about subverting your expectations and complicating the characters, complicating the situation. You think Darth Vader is pure evil, and then you find out that he's also his father, and it becomes a contradiction. Now he's conflicted, and that's just great drama. That's just the principles of great drama, and none of that is to be seen in the prequels. So you right away you want to bring back Darth Maul in Episode 2, and then you have a personal rivalry with our heroes, and that heightens the tension. And this is just writing 101.
How do you connect Darth Maul intimately to the Jedi's?
Um, well, to me, the way that is accomplished is it's actually very similar to the Phantom Menace in that Darth Maul kills one of Obi-Wan's best friends right in front of him, and then he's personally invested in taking down Darth Maul, and then the audience is brought on that journey. Although in my Episode 2, because of the way the plot is constructed, it's actually Anakin that confronts Darth Maul in Episode 2. Although they both fight, they both re-encounter Darth Maul.
Does Anakin have a connection to Darth Maul other than Obi-Wan's best friend dying? Or did you say Anakin's best friend or Obi-Wan's best friend?
It's really Obi-Wan's best friend. Um, Anakin doesn't really have a personal connection, not as much as Obi-Wan, but it's kind of it's determined by the plot that it's really Anakin's story. So Anakin had to be the one. This would make more sense if you had read my Episode 2 treatment, because
Is it on here?
I'm,
Or this is just Phantom Menace?
I'm skipping over so much. Uh, but the idea is more about the audience is brought into that personal rivalry, and then it's um, I don't really know how to describe it. It would make more sense if you read it. I feel like I'm just spoiling it if I'm trying to describe how it works straight. It
But
makes
basically, we
way.
were talking about the New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and you do have that sense that Darth Vader is a horrible person because throughout the entire movie, you love Obi-Wan, right? You love him so much. He's such a great character, and then he dies. Like, dude, you suck. You just killed Obi-Wan Kenobi. What the hell is wrong with you? Oh, you're the worst bad guy ever. Then he shows up in The Empire Strikes Back, and he's this dude coming after Luke Skywalker, your ultimate hero. And at the end of the movie, it turns out, oh, you're his father. I mean, total twist.
Yeah.
Is there
Yes.
something like that you're developing with a plot? Is there I'm Luke, I'm your father moment in your rewrites of the trilogy?
Yes, actually there is. There's a scene that thematically mirrors that. Some people have commented that it's perhaps a bit too close to Empire, but the way I've written it, I don't think it is. Um, it mirrors it, and you feel it. Like it has an emotional and thematic connection, but it's not. It was not intended to be too much of a repeat. It just feel it should feel, at least this is what I'm attempting. It should feel very appropriate, and
Mm.
and yes, episode two is constructed similarly, thematically similarly. The end of my episode two, not to jump ahead, but yes, it's Anakin finally ends up he encounters Darth Maul. It's this big showdown between him and Darth Maul, and Darth Maul is just it's a really brutal fight, and then Darth Maul is trying to emotionally compromise Anakin, and so he's taunting him, and then he reveals to Anakin's great shock that you were created by my master, so it doesn't matter if you can't win this fight. There's no winning for you. So if I win, I will have proven myself to my Dark Lord, Lord Sidious, and I will be the new, reigning champion, and there's nothing you can't stop. And then, but if you defeat me, you will turn to the dark side, and then you don't have any choice because you were created by Darth Sidious.
Hmm.
And Anakin just he doesn't believe it at first, but then he goes on to say, like, why do you think you're an orphan? The Jedi knew that you existed. That they in my rewrite, this again, I feel like I'm skipping ahead. It's established early on that there was a Jedi who was in the Jedi Order who was discovered had created a child using the Force, and then they found out about it, and then he was banished from the Jedi Order, and the reveal, the payoff is in episode two where Darth Maul says that was the Dark Lord. My lord is Darth Sidious. He's the one who created you, and that the Jedi abandoned you on Corellia, and that this is him trying to, of course, he's trying to break Anakin down, and it's ambiguous as to whether or not it was Sidious who abandoned him or if it was the Jedi Order who abandoned him there. And since it's Darth Maul delivering this news, you don't really know if you should believe it, or the audience, as well as Anakin. Hopefully, the audience is in lockstep with Anakin, not knowing whether or not he believes this. And then he threatens the princess, and that's when Anakin just freaks out and unleashes his full power and strikes down Darth Maul. And that's the ending of episode two. Is he's just emotionally devastated. He's killed in anger. He's keeping his relationship secret from the Jedi, and now he just learned that maybe the Jedi abandoned him as a child and orphaned him. And his father maybe is the Dark Lord of the Sith. So I think it works. I mean, I hope it works really well. I'm trying to build in a lot of emotional reveals, just like Empire Strikes Back.
But your bridge from the first movie to the second movie is the death of Obi-Wan's best friend.
Yes, it's similar to Phantom Menace in that somebody Obi-Wan cares about is killed by Darth Maul. Mine's different in that it's not his master, although I actually could write it so that it is his master, but it
I
wasn't.
loved Qui-Gon, whatever his name is. I thought he was a great character. I loved the actor who played him. I thought it was perfect, other than the writing of the movie. The direction the movie took was just brutally bad. But the character himself was really great. And obviously, Obi-Wan's going to have a master. And if the master dies, there's going to be some hard feelings there. But my question is, how do you connect Anakin to that best friend?
Well, in my script, they encounter each other and they greet each other warmly and they hug, and it's clear that they are old buddies from the Jedi Order, and that they have they have a history together, and that they care about each other. And then the reason why they've run into each other is because they're fighting Darth Maul, and then during the fight, uh, Darth Maul, in at least in the current draft, he traps Obi-Wan behind a force field, which is very similar to what happens in the Phantom Menace, and then he kills his friend in front of him, and it it should work. It's one of the things that's actually quite similar to what actually happens in the Phantom Menace, but
But there's
everything,
nothing wrong with how that happens. I mean, honestly, it's a great scene. All that is great buildup in
yeah,
the fan.
but everything else is around it is differently. All the details are different. So there's structurally a lot of similarities to the way the prequels are written, which really stand out to me. That despite the fact that nothing is sacred to me, I'm totally rewriting from scratch. I am keeping the overall story, and then the things that really stand out are just when you write it under the principles of just good story structure. These similarities just they pop out, and it's like there's certain things that you just can't get away with, or you can't get away from, because they're actually perfect. They're exactly what it should be. Like
One of
Obi-Wan.
those elements I'm wondering about is Corellia. Why move the initial introduction of Anakin from Tatooine?
Well, the logic behind that is that Tatooine is just an overused location.
That's interesting though. Why is it overused? I like how it's desolate, right? It's empty. It's
Yes,
horrible.
I
It's
agree with that.
miserable.
I've while I was rewriting it, that was definitely foremost in my mind. Is that there's a reason why in the prequels Anakin is on Tatooine again, just like Luke. Is that it's an old storytelling trope? Is that a hero from humble beginnings, from
Mhm.
a remote, completely unglamorous background, growing up like on a farmstead or something like that, and a home like the homestead in New Hope, and it's you want your protagonist to come from humble beginnings, and if it's desolate, it can enhance uh the contrast between that, and then when the wise man shows up and takes them off into the larger world, it works so much better if they come from very humble, kind of desolate beginnings, and then you bring them into like Coruscant or the Mos Eisley Cantina, and then you just show them, and by extension the audience, into this larger world, and you should feel that sense of awe and grandeur.
So Han Solo is from Corellia, right?
Right. Corellia is a pretty big part of the lore, and that's part of the reason.
But not from the
But it's
original series.
but
So
it's not.
fans would come into it not knowing anything other than
It's a
Han
planet.
Solo is from there.
It's a planet we've never seen, so
Yeah.
it seemed like a logical choice. And then, as far as like the desolate part, I tried to make Anakin. He's actually grew up in a big junkyard that's not glamorous at all, and hopefully it will work in terms of the story. And that's another thing that's kind of similar to the Phantom Menace is he still works in a kind of a mechanic shop. He's still really good with um, fixing vehicles. He's still a gearhead, which is it's the most Lucasian thing that I can think of that's actually still there. Is
How do you showcase that?
Well, one of the things that's still there, it's part of the lore, I think, is because everyone says when I first met your father, he was already a great pilot, and it was, I think, botched in the Phantom Menace by Anakin being too young, and he's
Yeah.
not really a pilot; he's really a racer.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the first things I changed, is that it's not a ground pod race thing. It's their sky. I call them sky swoops, but they're like stunt planes, basically. It'd be like the Star Wars version of stunt planes. Like really, just imagine the pod race, but if it was up in the air. If you've ever seen the 2006 Speed Racer film, it's kind of like that, where
I
you've
heard
got
recently that's amazing and I should
it is
watch it.
it is an amazing film, and I don't really care anything about Speed Racer. I was never into Speed Racer,
Yeah.
but that film is incredible. And it has
Lampooned by the critics or something. It just did not do very well.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on a big tangent, but if you want to imagine like how I picture the sky swoop races, it's very similar to these the scale of the tracks of the racetracks in Speed Racer. Like there's so many ramps that fly up into the sky like a roller coaster. That's how I imagine the sky swoop race.
In
In
the prequels, you have
more like
Anakin winning
more like a
that
roller
race
coaster.
and making money for them to fix their spaceship, right? There's an important element to that race. Is
Yeah.
there is there a way that you introduce his ability as a pilot in some meaningful way within the story?
Uh, Well, that's actually a it's funny because it's something that's dictated by the both the lore, and it's also some interesting because it's one of the things that it has not changed. Is he's still a pilot? You establish that when he's as soon as Obi-Wan meets him, he has to already be an accomplished pilot, and that's much more clear in my rewrite, I think, because he's already famous as a racing champion, and that's why Obi-Wan specifically comes to Corellia to find him. Unlike in the original, where it's just happenstance, it's just
Happenstance,
serendipity,
yeah.
and it's not significant except maybe you can kind of in your own mind say, oh well. Actually, I think Qui-Gon actually says it. He thinks it's the will of the Force that they found him, and it just feels very. I don't know. I never felt like that rang true. It always felt
You
not
want things to be more
Anakin.
purposeful, right? I mean, as far as like the original trilogy, when Luke Skywalker goes to seek Obi-Wan Kenobi, he has a reason to go there. They don't just happen upon each other accidentally. He was delivering that droid to him. And he was delivering that droid to him because the droid had something that announced he needed to go to that dude. So, I mean, the path of the plot was actually
Yeah, the
naturally
plotting.
progressing.
Yes, the plotting in A New Hope is intimidating in how utterly perfect it is. The R2 and the Death Star plans are the narrative thread that really drives the entire film all the way right up to the very conclusion, the very climax where the Death Star blows up, and it's just so seamlessly driving the plot perfectly from the first
I
scene.
think they call that the MacGuffin, right? And the thing
Yes,
that they're
and
trying to do.
yes, and there's a YouTube channel that I think is called Just Right, and he literally just posted the other day a video about that, about MacGuffins, and he talks about how perfect it structurally is, how great the MacGuffin is in A New Hope, and his argument is that it's because R2D2 is a character, and
Yeah.
so typically the MacGuffin is something you don't actually really care that much about, but or as he actually quotes Alfred Hitchcock, who said that he defined the MacGuffin as something that the audience doesn't really care about, but all the characters in the story care a lot about. And his argument was that A New Hope is brilliant because you care about R2D2 because he's a character. The MacGuffin is an actual character.
George
And
Lucas is good at that,
yeah,
creating these MacGuffins. I mean, he did it in Willow too with the baby,
yeah,
right? A baby as a MacGuffin. I mean, it's like, wow, that's really powerful.
yeah. There's
Yeah,
another YouTube channel that has another great video essay about American Graffiti and how great the writing is in that, and the George Lucas's writing output in the '70s and in right up to Empire. Well, I would go up to Return of the Jedi. His writing output right up to that point in his early career was just mind
see,
blowing and
Last
amazing.
Crusade is good too.
Um,
Willow is
well,
great.
he didn't really. I mean, he wrote the
It's a
stories.
story, right?
But yeah, yeah, in Willow, he consulted on the story. What blows my mind is I always thought that Empire Strikes Back was not that he wasn't that involved in writing it, and that it was mostly Lawrence Kasdan, and that turned out to not be true. I found out just recently, in the past couple of years, that George Lucas almost entirely wrote Empire Strikes Back himself, and that Lawrence Kasdan was brought in very late in the process, and he just kind of polished the dialogue a little bit, and that blew my mind because it's one of the greatest screenplays ever written, and that's George Lucas. And early George Lucas was a genius. I mean, it's just incredible that the same guy made the prequels.
What's your MacGuffin?
Um, That's I feel bad that you asked me that because I was thinking about that video essay recently, and it was making me think about how, what do I need to improve upon? This guy's channel is just great. I've been referencing it quite a bit, and I intend to reference it more in the future about where should I improve from here? Because I'm really pushing myself to really policy, because the drafts right now are really kind of just like first drafts. As proud of
Mhm.
them as I am, and how exciting the material in there is, especially in the wake of seeing The Last Jedi, it just really hammered home like how much work there is left to do. The characters aren't fleshed out. There's no dialogue. I'm working on better character arcs. The real tough one is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'd love to give Obi-Wan a great character arc, and I have a lot of ideas as far as how that could work.
How old do you think Obi-Wan is when the movie starts? He's obviously older than Anakin, but are they the same age? Because they could actually be
He,
the same age, couldn't they?
no, they can't be the same age. He has to be in his late 30s in order for the timeline to work. Um,
As in terms of him being able to apprentice Anakin, or vice versa.
well, he has to be an old man in A New Hope.
Isn't
So,
Anakin an old man in A New Hope too? He's
yeah,
30 years older, so that'd make him nearing 50s with your timeline
well,
specifically.
for him to be, I think, believable as an old man in A New Hope, Han Solo literally says, where'd you dig up that old fossil?" So he has to be old enough for that line to be convincing. And the way the prequels are written, Obi-Wan is like 50 something in A New Hope when that line is delivered. So I don't think it works. And he's really young in A Phantom Menace. So in my rewrite, one of the things I fixed was Obi-Wan's age is he's got to be about 38. He's got to be in his late 30s
So he's
when
no longer an apprentice to what's his face,
no, not in mine. But there
and they're
is.
just buddies basically. They're just two Jedi exploring Corellia.
Like his master could appear in the films. There's no reason why his master can't be in the films. The head of the Jedi Council could be his master. The character who dies could be his master. That's not something that doesn't work in my story. In fact, if any of you want to, you can add those comments to the bottom, and I can easily change that so that one of them is his master. If anyone thinks that that's makes you more emotionally invested in that character, then is it better that a friend of his dies in front of him, or is it better that his master is literally killed in front of him? Because that's his father figure. So emotionally, perhaps that's better.
The whole thing about the Force Ghost, though, that's something that Obi-Wan had discovered on his own, right? Or Yoda, something like in the prequels, they discovered this ability through the Force to join the Force and become Force ghosts after they died, right?
Uh, it's not clear from the lore, although now, I mean, so much lore has been. It was kind of codified somewhat by Lucas in the prequels that Yoda basically has lines that implies that he's going to teach Obi-Wan
How to do that.
how to do that, and I haven't really. That's one of the things that I haven't really spent much time working on.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
I was just thinking, I wonder how impactful it would be if your master dies, but your master could join the Force. So your master is always there for you, so it doesn't really matter because death happens to everybody. You know what I mean?
yes, yes.
So make it emotionally impactful.
The way my story is structured, though, it doesn't require his anyone to come back as a Force Ghost. Um,
When Obi-Wan died in the original trilogy, it was impactful because you didn't know he was going to be back in Return of the Jedi to issue some lines of wisdom or whatnot. Oh, did I lose you?
no, I agree. Yeah.
Um, so you haven't yet established a actual plot line from beginning to end, but you did decide on another interesting aspect. You deleted Padme completely.
Oh, right. I remember what your question was. Is what was the MacGuffin in my episode one? Uh, uh, that might be the answer. It may be this. I've rewritten Padme as a new character. Well, essentially a new character. She still serves the same role in the story. You need Anakin's love interest. He has to fall.
Yeah.
He has to have kids.
how he fell, right? In
It's
terms of
essential to the story, and it just makes perfect logical sense that um, that this romantic relationship should be a secret romantic relationship, and that is precipitates his downfall as a Jedi and his fall to the dark side. Um, and yeah, Padme is a pretty awful character and pretty much has to be totally rewritten. And so yeah, I've done that, and apologies to any Padme fans out there, but I could really go on a tear about how she's
God, I love the actress.
yeah,
Natalie,
Natalie
not
Portman,
Natalie, what's her name?
exactly. Yeah,
Nicole, what's her name?
nothing against Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman. Yeah, God, she's wonderful. But duh.
Not in this movie.
You're not good in this movie. And yeah, it's like
Have
basically they could have put a piece of plywood shaped like a woman in her place and would have done the exact same thing.
yes, I agree, and a lot of people like her because she's got very important jobs, and I would argue that that does not make a good
She
character.
didn't do anything besides like bear babies at one point. That's it. That's all she did.
In
I mean,
terms,
Jar Jar had more of an impact on the actual plot at the end of
yeah,
the day, right? He's the one who gives the Senate or the power of the government to the Emperor, and that's what
yes, in terms of the plot, I think she only gives birth to the baby. I think that's the only service to the plot.
causes the impetus for
Yeah, she's
Skywalker to fall to the dark side or whatever. Oh my God! Just thinking about it,
doesn't really
can't
though.
dig too deep because it's just you turn the sand is covering shit. I mean, it's just covering really horribleness and ugh. But
Yeah,
anyway, you
in terms,
deleted Padme.
yeah, in terms of fixing the story, that's one of the things that I think Lucas really shot himself in the foot by deciding. Clearly, he decided that Padme needs to be a saint, basically, and he also wrote the Jedi as virtually perfect in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes he made was not really focusing on Anakin as a character, and that
Well, I would
necessity.
disagree about one thing. I think he did give the Jedi one bad flaw in that they were too proud of their abilities. They didn't. They were too big to fail, basically.
I agree that you can definitely read into it and definitely pick apart, and a lot of the fans have picked apart the way the Jedi Order are portrayed. But from a writing standpoint, it's pretty obvious to me that Lucas did not. He clearly, to me, I think, was writing them as like this kind of perfect, good organization. I don't think there's any intentional gray area added to the Jedi Order, at least not that I can see. But there's room for interpretation. Like you said, that's a great example. Is they almost feel full of themselves, like
There were no Sith anymore. They were the magic wizards of the universe and no or the galaxy, and nobody was going to be able to take them down. And they could just
uh,
sit on their laurels and wait.
yeah, and then going back to the MacGuffin, the plot of my episode one rewrite is somewhat driven by the new Padme. I've decided to rename her Eris. Anakin and Eris, I think, sounds way better than Anakin and Padme. I still cringe when Darth Vader screams "Where's Padme?" It just doesn't work. Which a lot of people have pointed out that it's such a lousy name. It just doesn't sound right coming out of Darth Vader's voice. Um, and there's lots of reasons why I settled on the name Eris, which, if you wanted to get into it,
Yeah.
she kind of drives the plots to some extent, mostly in this second and third act. I don't know if I would call her a MacGuffin, but in terms of like writing, you could say that's much better than a MacGuffin because my episode one doesn't really have a MacGuffin. And if it's based around characters, it's maybe written, it's maybe stronger than a MacGuffin. Um, hopefully it works. But yeah, Darth Maul kidnaps her, and that kind of drives the plot, especially in Act 2 and 3.
Eris is a completely original name. I don't see it anywhere.
Almost. It was used as a kind of a botched translation in Final Fantasy VII, and the people who recognize that name, I've already gotten comments of people complaining about, no, you can't use that name because they immediately go to Final Fantasy. And
Well,
I'm
it's spelled different though, isn't it? Aerith.
uh, like I said, it was a botched translation. Her actual name in Final Fantasy VII is Aerith. But the first version of that game, it was spelled Eris, I'm pretty sure. Although I'm not a Final Fantasy fan and I've never played that game, so that's not why I chose the name. I chose the name for like a dozen other reasons. It's the female form of, well, like you said, it's not used. I haven't seen it used in anything else. And if you count the fact that it was a botched translation and that in Final Fantasy her name is actually Aerith, which is a reference to Earth. That's a big theme in that game. Not that I know, I just going from the Wikipedia. Um, and that Eris is actually, yeah, I've never seen Eris used in anything else. It sounds great. It matches the naming convention of Anakin, Eris, Luke, Leia, Bail, Brea. It's just a convention for the Skywalker clan that it's just a naming convention, and it's a Greek name. It's like the female version of Ares, which is a famous constellation, so it fits thematically of space and Star Wars. And uh that, and the fact that I wanted it, out of all the A names, it sounded the most original. It sounded very Star Wars. It The alliteration with Anakin. And the one thing I realized after I picked it, I was like, oh wait, she's literally an heiress, and her name is Eris.
Uh-huh.
So at first I was like, well, maybe that's not, maybe I shouldn't pick that. But then I realized, you know what? It's in terms of writing principles, it's better to have a meaningful name than a meaningless name.
Well, in
So
terms of writing too, I mean, you could always have place savers as well, and you don't have to have the
yeah,
actual name. You could work on that later on. And
yeah.
I was looking up. There's a thing out there right now, and I can't seem to find it, where you can make Star Wars names, like you do porn names or stripper names or something like that, where you
Yeah,
take
I've worked.
syllable.
Yeah, I've really struggled with the names. I've definitely that's probably my weak point is coming up with names. So I've actually worked pretty hard on the names, which is kind of why I don't like it when people say that you can't use Eris just because it's from a video game, which I disagree. Her name is actually Aerith in that game.
I mean,
But
Luke is an Earthling name, and so is Leia. I don't know if
yeah,
Leia's an Earthling name, but Han. I mean,
yeah,
that's a name. I mean, there are names all over the place.
yeah.
That
Luke and Ben are pretty conventional.
Ben, yeah, his
They
name
got
is just Ben though. It's not Benjamin, is it?
they never call him Benjamin.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
So, Eris is your replacement for Padme, and she is not from a random planet.
yeah, this is one of the most. This is not. I can't claim that I'm the only one to think of this, but yeah, she should be from
Oh,
Alderaan.
she should. I mean, that's such a dumb thing not to put her there. She
Exactly.
should be.
She could be. I I think I thought of this myself before I saw anyone else come up with it, but it doesn't surprise me that other people have thought of this. That that Naboo should have been Alderaan the entire time. It's a very
All yeah.
similar planet anyway, so why didn't Lucas even think of that? And then it gives weight to the fact that Alderaan is destroyed in the original trilogy. So if we had seen it, a lot of it, and spent a lot of time there,
You'd have an emotional attachment to it. Yeah, man, that just makes total sense. My question is, why didn't he pick Alderaan? I mean, I've heard that he wanted to have different environments within the Phantom Menace, but then if that's the case, why did he put his starting character on Tatooine and not someplace else?
in terms of good writing principles, it doesn't make any sense at all why it wasn't Alderaan, especially since we she needs uh, Padme's daughter needs to end up on Alderaan.
Needs to.
It's dictated
Yeah,
by the plot, and it's just good writing principles to
got to be some kind of connection there. You can't just randomly give your daughter to who was that dude? He was like the king or something, right?
right. Bail Organa is also a big part of the lore, although even before the prequels. Um, Even in back in 1977 when the original came out, Leia says you helped my father in the Clone Wars, so it's a big part of the lore that Bail Organa is a significant character, and he's a much bigger character in my rewrite, and he's the king
And
of
he deserves to be. He didn't have really much to do in the original trilogy or the prequels.
yeah, he's
Yeah, he
barely
dies at the end of them too, or he dies in the beginning or the middle part of the original trilogy too. I mean, you want to have some kind of emotional attachment to this
Yeah,
guy.
off screen, yeah. And it's so much better if we care about him and when we see Alderaan blow up, if you know that he's there and he dies, it's more meaningful. Although technically that's in the lore, but I'm saying that if you have spent time on Alderaan, there's a quick glimpse of it in episode 3, but that's it. If it would be so much better if it had been Naboo this whole time, it was Alderaan. And like you said, who do you just give Leia away to some random family? It works so much better if it's
It really does. And what's his face? The Emperor was actually from Naboo. Would you also make him from Alderaan as well?
well, my rewrite is a bit mysterious, but basic. I don't know if I'm gonna literally explain it all or if it's I think it should be a little bit ambiguous, but in mine, Sidious is this uh entity that's been around for like 100 years, maybe longer, and he's been using the dark side to sustain himself, and that he was part of the Jedi Order, and then they found out that he was actually well, I don't know if it's ambiguous as to whether or not they actually find out that he was a Sith Lord before or after, but they basically they discover that he's created this child, although this all happens off screen, and then they afterwards they suspect that he was a dark force dark sider this whole time, and then in my rewrite he then goes away for
Wow. That actually might be your MacGuffin right there. The search for the Dark Forces child brings them to
that's basically
Alderaan, Corellia, something along those lines, and they just happen upon this guy,
That's basically what
right?
happens is that Obi-Wan seeks out Anakin because he's become famous as this racer who, they suspect, well, when they hear about his abilities, they suspect, oh, well, this kid's probably got the Force. He's probably very strong with the Force. It would explain this. So yeah, it all kind of ties into that. And so Sidious goes off, and then part of his grand scheme is that he then becomes a senator on Alderaan, and it's implied that he uses the Force to kind of influence them to gain power and become a senator and get the ear of the King Organa. Um, but none of that stuff I really intend to fully literally point out. It's just kind of all that's all in the background, and Sidious should be mysterious, and that should play into him being scary.
So the original trilogy, Star Wars: A New Hope, starts on Tatooine. It goes from Tatooine to the Millennium Falcon to the Death Star, and that's it. Oh no, it goes to the Rebel base on what was that
Yeah.
called? The Rebel base one. So you don't really go to a lot of places in the original trilogy. You don't have to planet hop too much.
Every movie has at least 3 major planets, and I've kept that in mind quite a bit as far as structurally. You need at least 3 or 4 major.
So Corellia, Coruscant, and
Alder.
Alderaan.
Well, mine actually has another location. I've moved the Jedi Temple to a moon of Coruscant, that I'm currently calling Edo, which is a Japanese name. I wanted to have a Japanese name, and should it also references Eden, Edo, and it should actually it pays off with Return of the Jedi because it sounds similar to Endor. So you see another forest moon at the end of the saga when the Jedi return, and so thematically it should tie all together. That in the first film, there's a forest preserve moon that's totally jungles and forests and wildlife, and it in total contrast to Coruscant, which is totally concrete and steel. And part of the idea there is if Coruscant is a giant city, then Edo, the moon, would kind of be like Central Park. And so it's this preserve. And then thematically, I'm playing into the concept that was kind of lost in the prequels, is the idea that the Force is all about life and that life literally generates the Force, which is what Obi-Wan says in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have the Jedi much more connected to nature, and that be a bigger theme in the prequels is the nature connection to the Force. And in terms of writing, it really fits. I was surprised at how many connections just spring out from just embracing that idea. Um, and so, yeah, so there's the 4 major locations in episode 1.
So, how is Eris as a character? Is she a
Oh yeah,
goody two shoes, or is she a more what kind of character is she?
yes. So I'm still working on the characters. I've mostly been focusing on detailing the
Plot.
plot. So the plot, I want the plot to work perfectly well, and then if I do end up writing fully fleshed out screenplays, that's when I would really hammer out all the details of all the characters and all the character arcs. Uh, but I've got a good start on all of that. So one of the major things is Eris. I wanted her to be a princess, and that's important to the lore. That Leia should literally be royalty. If she's a princess, her mother should be real royalty, as opposed to in the prequels where Padme is an elected queen.
That's so weird. And they're all like pre-adolescent, 12-year-old, 13-year-old girls or something weird like that. It's like,
Yeah, it's
what
so
is your
stupid.
deal, man?
It's crazy and dumb, but it makes no sense.
No sense at all.
Makes no goddamn sense. So I'm going far away, running far away from that stupidity. And so she's literally a princess, and that uh, her parents are King Bail and Brea Organa. They're the king and queen of Alderaan. And from there, you get to play into, or at least I have played into, the medieval knights, swords and sorcery, dragons and princesses in kidnapped in fortresses, and you have to defeat the Dark Knight or the evil dragon and save the princess and all that classical mythology stuff. I'm kind of playing into that. There's tons of references in my episode 1 to medieval mythology and Arthurian legend and all of that stuff, the Matter of Britain, all that lore. And I think it really works actually really well. I was actually really pleased with all that thematic stuff of to me, it really, really feels like Star Wars. And that's something that you really see in all the Star Wars ripoffs that came out in the wake of Star Wars, is that they were very aware of this is really just, it's kind of like King Arthur in space. And you saw that a lot in, like, I remember one of the movies I watched just for reference was Krull. I think it's,
Yeah, Curl with the star thing. Yeah.
yes, and it's a movie that I was aware of but had never actually watched, and I wanted to watch like a few Star Wars ripoffs because those ripoffs are more Star Warsy than the prequels are,
Yeah.
because they really get the core material. Like the original Star Wars is so pulpy, it's so old timey in its lore, its mythology. It's all about medieval mythology and old samurai stories, which is really just the Eastern version of medieval knights. Um, that's the stuff that the core identity of Star Wars that it just feels completely lost in the prequels.
I agree.
And so you watch Krull, and it starts off literally with them riding horses. It's supposed to be this space epic, but they were not afraid to just go full all in on the medieval mythology and the
I
imagery.
saw that movie in the theater too.
Oh wow.
That dates me a little bit.
Yeah, I'd never seen it. And there's some good stuff in there. A lot of those Star Wars ripoffs. If you like, I'll give you an example. I remember finally saw Flash Gordon, the 1980 Flash Gordon, uh, and
Best thing about that movie is the Queen song.
got a great Queen soundtrack. But there's this scene where Ming the Merciless is just being evil as all get out. Like he's so evil, and it gave me this thrill. I was like, oh wow, that's like the most Star Warsy thing. I haven't seen something like that in forever, where you have this super powerful villain, and it really hammered home the concept that it's not, to me, it's not Star Wars unless the villains are extremely evil, very overpowered. You should feel like evil sorcerers or evil wizards, and they should be cruel, and you should hate them. And then the
Yeah,
heroes.
one of the points that you make here is more dark side lore, right? And making their evilness make sense too, where it comes from.
Yes, part of one of the ideas that I was that kind of colored in there was, if you for you to really get the dark Anakin's fall to the dark side, you have to kind of at least give us a little bit more details about the nature of the dark side. And
What it is, yeah. What makes them so bad? Why do they do this thing? I
yes,
mean,
and what exactly, what does it entail to actually become a Sith Lord, and what do they actually believe? You have to at least have a little bit of an insight to their philosophy. You need the opposite of the mirror image of Obi-Wan's description of the Jedi in A New Hope, and that's just kind of almost essential to understanding Anakin's fall to the dark side. So there's this great YouTube clip. It was a, or it's actually it was a TV spot that from when the Phantom Menace came out, and it had a monologue by Darth Maul, and he's talking about the dark side, and that it's really great, and it should have been in the movie, and it wasn't. It might have been a deleted scene or something, but I think he says something like "Fear is my ally," and so I've got like a scene, at least one or two scenes where Sidious is talking to Darth Maul, and you the audience should get clued into the nature of uh, his brainwashing as far as like in the philosophy of the Sith. And so I've got this description here. Maybe I should actually read it.
go for it.
Uh, we see Darth Maul's advanced conditioning by his master being fully brainwashed that the Jedi are evil and represent stagnation and repression, that the Sith will bring order and justice to the galaxy, that the weak deserve to die, and that those who oppose them are evil. So, just a little bit of an insight into the perspective or the philosophy or the ideology of the Sith, and what uh, kind of the concept they you should get like at least a plausible philosophy from Sidious that you can see him feeding it to Darth Maul, and then that's all you really need to then realize that this is what is in store for Anakin, and it should all like click um, when you're watching the original trilogy as to what the nature of Darth Vader is.
And it is an antithesis, oh my God, the word's coming out completely wrong.
No,
Antithesis of the, the good, the Jedi. It's got to be the good versus the evil, a
right.
morality tale, right? It's got to be
Selfishness versus selflessness. If the Jedi by
love versus hate, fear versus bravery, or whatnot, right?
exactly, that's perfect. That's exactly how I would say it. So it's I think it really is great because the idea of selfishness and only caring about oneself is you see this in everyday life, people pushing those kinds of ideologies. So I think it really should connect with the audience as far as like they're not just evil for the sake of being evil. There's an actual bit of a uh, coherent ideology there, and it should make it more compelling as villains because there's
You
nothing.
don't really ever get that, do you? In any of the movies, you don't really get an idea of what philosophies exist behind the Sith.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
this
you
is
know,
kind
you have the master and the apprentice, but what else does that mean?
Yes, exactly. I think I actually saw a clip where Lucas literally says that, he says something about it's all about or his philosophy of morality is basically, there's people who care about other people and there's people who only care about themselves. And that you can see that in his description of the Jedi and his all the lore of the Jedi is that they're selfless and they're about helping people. And so by necessity, I mean, this is all taken from the expanded universe. Can't really take credit for this. That they've kind of really fleshed out the ideology of the Sith, and there needed to be some of that in the prequels, and there really wasn't, sadly.
So your Eris and your Anakin are gonna fall in love in the first movie, or do they know each other already going into the story? Do they meet each other by the end of it, like a Princess Leia and the rest of her love triangle? Do I mean, how do you introduce Anakin to Ares? I mean, he's a junkyard dog, basically. She's a royalty. The Jedi show up. That's the link, but how do they connect?
Well, as I said in my story, Anakin's kind of made a name for himself as this sky
Sky
racer.
Racer guy.
Yeah, and so Obi-Wan shows up to investigate, and it just so happens that it's the tournament. It's like the Galactic Championship, so everyone's there. So Obi-Wan's there to check out Anakin, and the king and queen of Alderaan show up, and they bring Eris, their princess, their daughter Eris along, and in my treatment I've got a description of they kind of meet eyes before the race, and there might even be a little bit more there, but basically they notice each other in Act One, and then they she gets kidnapped in Act Two, and then in Act Three, there's a scene where um, Anakin is left behind. Obi-Wan doesn't want him to, he's keeping him far away from the battle. But coincidentally, he's in the back of the like the command center, and it's revealed over the radio that Eris is kidnapped and that she's in Darth Maul's fortress. And then he runs back to the hangar and he jumps uh, in a starfighter, and he goes off to save her. He has much more agency than Anakin did in the Phantom Menace, where he just Qui-Gon actually tells Anakin to just sit in the starfighter, like, here, you just sit there, sit tight, and you'll be safe. It's very random and not compelling in the way the Phantom Menace is written. So that's one of the changes. That's his real hero's moment where he decides that he's going to get involved, and I think it's plausible because it's set up in Act One or more than plausible in Act One that he's an accomplished pilot. So it would make sense that the one thing he would be very comfortable with is jumping in a starfighter, a fighter, and running to save the day, because he's probably most comfortable in the pilot scene.
I was just thinking the reason that Leia is dropped off on Alderaan is not only just to split the twins up, but she could hide from the Emperor and her father on Alderaan better than any place else. By
Yeah,
making Ares the princess to the king of Alderaan, don't you eliminate that fog of war? Basically, you allow the Emperor and Darth Vader to know who she is in a way. I mean,
yeah. I mean, that's one of there's a few issues like that where it's not perfect, or it's not simple plot wise. I mean, she has to end up there, just because they decided when they wrote Return of the Jedi that Leia is the other twin. So I think you have to play into Obi-Wan's line that she remains, quote unquote, quote, she is safely anonymous. So in my headcanon, Leia is hiding in plain sight.
would you
And,
eliminate the Alderaan connection and potentially make her a royalty of Corellia instead? But there's
well,
still a
my
connection to
solution.
Alderaan, like potentially the royal families are related somehow, or I don't even think they explain that in
Well, the way I'm
lore.
writing it now, I'm playing into the other essential part of the lore that people tend to forget about, because this was completely thrown out the window when Lucas wrote the prequels, is that everything in the prequels, especially the last act of Revenge of the Sith, just spoils everything that happens in the original trilogy. You see Anakin become Darth Vader. There's an overlong scene where he puts on the suit, so there's no ambiguity that Anakin is Darth Vader.
Mhm.
Which ruins the most famous twist in
Interesting.
all
I
cinema
never
history.
thought about it like that.
Oh,
If
really?
you're watching the three movies in a row, you do get spoiled. There's no reason to watch the original trilogy at all anymore, is there?
Yeah, I mean that's the guiding principle of my rewrite, is fixing all of that to as far as possible, and the Anakin reveal, you can't completely preserve it, but I swear I've gotten really close. I've thought about this a lot, and I've gotten it as close as you possibly can. It's at least ambiguous, which I like. Um, but you can't, it's impossible to have it be completely out of left field the way it originally played to the original audience in 1980. And then the other thing is, as I said, people forget that uh, Darth Vader does not know that he had twins. He does not know that until he reads Luke's mind on the second Death Star, and that's when he finds out. and people tend to forget that because it's subtle. It's not totally explicit. It's almost implied a little bit, but it's not that. It's not just implied. It's
And
obvious that that is when
so
he.
the fans didn't know Luke Skywalker had a sister either until that movie.
Yeah, exactly. And so, by definition in the lore, Anakin cannot know that Leia even exists. So I don't consider that to be a plot hole. He was not looking for uh, two children ever. And so I think it's totally plausible in my script that Obi-Wan gives Luke to Owen, who in my story is a friend of Obi-Wan and not really doesn't not as close to Anakin, although Anakin knows he exists, but in my script, Owen runs off to the outer rim, doesn't really tell anyone where he's going, and then Obi-Wan tracks him down and it gives Luke to Owen, and then Leia doesn't. In my version of the story, even the audience doesn't know that Leia or that Eris had twins. There's nothing to give away that she had twins. I was thinking about if anything, there'd be like in the background, only upon repeat viewings, you might notice that there is another baby or that she's holding something that you would only then, once you know the lore, you could rewatch and notice, oh, she must be holding Leia. But you like it would have to be buried in the background. You wouldn't want to spoil that for the audience, the first viewing. So you know that Eris is pregnant, and you know that she gives birth, but in mind she gives birth off screen, and so you don't know that she has twins. And then that reveal is preserved in Return of the Jedi that she had twins. She didn't just have one child. And so every reveal in the original trilogy, I've worked really hard to try and preserve, and that's why I don't think it's a plot hole that Leia is a VIP. She's a prominent individual. She's hiding in plain sight.
Man, you've been so generous with your time with me today, and we're about at an hour and 45 minutes. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I wanted to
I
talk
could
to
talk
you.
about this for hours.
I bet, man. I want to have you back on because this is not even the whole first movie. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think we've
there's
barely
more.
scratched the surface.
What's that?
I think we've barely scratched the surface.
Barely scratched the surface. There's so much here, and I love it so much. And I wanted to basically, sum this up with an idea of your writing past. Have you ever written anything before like this? Have you ever written a screenplay or played around with fiction?
I've dabbled in writing. I've never been a professional writer, although the first version of this, when it got posted, it actually got me my first real writing job on a real movie. Um, but no, before that, never anything professional. But as I told you earlier, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. I've always wanted to be a director. So I've always, for years, I've had a folder of script ideas and notes and story notes and scraps. Just I have a big folder of kind of writing scraps, and this is I think I could safely say this is the thing that I've fleshed out the most. But I've never actually written down and finished an entire screenplay. It's a big time it's a big time commitment. It's a big investment to finish an entire screenplay. Um,
What about novels?
no, I have ideas for novels, but no, I've never actually finished a big novel, or I've never written a big novel or screenplay or anything. But
I don't know
uh,
about a movie. I
uh,
mean, obviously, the amount of effort that would take. We were talking before we started, or maybe it was the beginning of this conversation. Phantom Menace cost $115 million to make, and what's it called? The Last Jedi cost $225 million to make. That's not something that you could just come up with to make your movie, but it's 100% free to open up a Google document and write 90,000 words.
right,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And this is so well fleshed out. There's so many ins and outs, and when I'm talking to you about it, I really feel like, what it feels like to write a novel. I mean, I've written two myself, and I just finished my second one, and it's like you start thinking about how it all wraps up. How the laces kind of wrap around each other, and I would love to see this thing fleshed out into a novel.
yeah. I've been reminded quite a few times of just the fact that it's an entire trilogy. The size and of this is this the size of the project is it's a bit intimidating, and it's a bit yeah, it's pretty big. Um, it's kind of ambitious, but I don't really think too much about it. It's really a passion project. I'm mostly just driven by this is something that I don't have to force myself to write. It's just I want to see these fixed. You know, it's just it feels so it's like almost a crime the prequels that they are not properly written.
Yeah.
It just it's so much of it while writing this, especially just uh, from the philosophy that I'm writing it from, the perspective of just getting it to match the original trilogy. So much of the writing process, it just feels like it's almost writing itself. So many writers say that uh, stories tend to write themselves, and they kind of have logical um, direction, and then it just kind of comes full circle. And I run into that constantly while I'm writing this. And as I said, especially because I'm trying to match the original trilogy, so much of this just feels like it crystallizes once I get a certain point as far as notes that I've collected. I mean, I it's really there were these really exciting moments when I would get this idea where everything would just crystallize, and and then I got to a certain point where I had enough notes collected that I just felt like the whole thing just kind of came together, and it was so easy to write the treatments for episode 1 and 2. It just poured out of me, and it was just I really just had to connect the dots because I had so many notes and had spent so much time thinking about it.
What I think you need to be careful of is what you're going to find is this is going to gather people to you. They're going to come to you and they're going to be your fans and they're going to demand that you actually produce something with these ideas.
I
And
see.
the
Yep.
next thing you know, you're going to be an Andy Weir with a website and hundreds of thousands of people going, "Come on, Ben, finish the story, man, finish the story."
Yeah, I actually thought that was going to happen with this new draft, which has so many more details and so many things fleshed out. Because the previous post, I didn't even include everything. In fact, the original post from last year, which I posted in our fixing movies, that the funny thing about that post is that it was only my best notes. It was not a draft, it was not a treatment or even a short story. It was just the notes that I was most excited about, the biggest changes, the biggest structural changes and story structure and plot points. And that post blew up and it became one of the top 5 posts on that subreddit. And to this day, if you Google fixing the prequels, it's still the #1 result on Google. So, and the funny thing about that is that as I said, it was only the best of my notes. It wasn't even close to everything that I'd thought of. And so I worked on it for another like year and a half. And then this new post that I just posted that you discovered one of the posts that I put it, I actually, I submitted it to a number of subreddits and none of them took off the way that original post did, which, I was aware that that was a possibility that Reddit is totally unpredictable. You never know what's going to pop and what's not. Uh, but nevertheless, I felt vindicated or justified. I don't know if those are the right words, but the responses that I did get have been overwhelming. Just so much positivity, especially from people who are clearly fans. The most passionate responses are people who are fans of the original trilogy. They seem to really get it. They get
Also,
what
writers, man, you posted in one of my favorite subreddits in terms of where I submit work to.
you know.
Writers love this. It scratches an itch. It's like you're developing something amazing. You're
Oh,
satisfying something. You know what I
oh,
mean? There are holes in these movies, and you're right. It was a it's a horrible injustice that these movies were created
I
off of
agree.
Star Wars.
I agree. Yeah, they just feel so wrong, and it's to me, it's an open wound. The existing films.
And we
And
just want to enjoy. And at the end of the day, I mean, we even tear apart, I mean, not me because I was young. And I guess those 90s kids are kind of like this. I mean, they don't tear it apart either. They just let it wash over them. Return of the Jedi was horrible, supposedly, according to some of these. And I love it. I love it. There's nothing
yeah,
you can say bad about that movie. I love it.
well,
But
I have to admit that there are tiny flaws to that movie that
no,
I've
it's
kind
not,
of
man. Take it
become
back.
a,
Take it back right now.
become aware of over the years, just seeing it so many times. But I agree. I think it's still a great, great, great movie. One of the best movies ever made.
So you're a fan of all the movies, right? You don't hate any of them. You just wish they had done a better job on the prequels.
No, if anything, this going through this has made me hate the prequels, which
Oh,
I
really?
did not hate them before, but seeing how great they could have been, really, slowly over time, I've gone from being disappointed with them to realizing just how bad they really are, to realizing just how terrible they are, to now that I see how great they could have been, I kind of, I think I kind of hate you. And I was rewatching episode 3 while I was working on the rewrite. I needed to check some things, and the first time I was like, "Oh, this movie's not that bad." And then I watched it more of it again, and I had almost the opposite reaction. I was like, "Oh my god, this movie's so bad."
I can
So
watch Phantom Menace. I think I said this all the way up until Jar Jar comes on the screen, and I can't do it anymore.
yeah, yeah.
It's a decent movie up to
Phan-
that point.
Phantom
It's not
Menace.
bad.
If you cut out Jar Jar,
It's
is
1,000 times better.
is watchable. I would say, yeah. If you, I don't know if it's 1,000 times better, but it's a like I can enjoy movies. I don't know, ironically, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but um,
It's
I can
so
enjoy a
funny.
good bad movie. I like even bad movies have an appeal. It's hard to describe.
But you know what
Um,
amazes me more than anything else is that he still manages to be a legend even after producing absolute crap. You know
Lucas,
what I mean? Yeah.
I think Lucas's reputation is earned. It's what bothers me is that his reputation has been. Hold on, I'm going to try and boost my microphone levels. Let me see what this does. Is there any change there?
Yeah, I can hear the people in the background now.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't crank it all the way up.
Crank
Um,
it down slightly.
how about
Is that
now?
that? No, you're still pretty high up there.
Yeah, they're watching a movie in the other room. I was hoping that the microphone would not catch that.
I don't hear it now. I can lower you down a little bit on this end. You're just loud in my ears.
Yeah, this is the right microphone. The levels was on 0, so I don't know how you could even hear me before at all. Default
Okay, you're perfect. All right.
automated.
So, Scion of the Force is the name of your Phantom Menace, right?
Yes, that's the working title.
What's the working title of the second one?
Oh, the second one is much easier. It's just called the Clone Wars.
Oh, okay. That was you like the Clone Wars. There has to
Uh,
be a Clone War, actually. I think I remember seeing that in your post. I'm trying to find it,
yes,
honestly,
yes.
on sci-fi writers. It must have fallen off because I'm not seeing it anywhere.
I can send you a link to one of the posts.
Yeah, do that.
Yes, I've noticed. I mean, there's some really interesting debates. Some of people throwing
Oh,
out
here it is. I found it. Cool. Interesting debate.
one of the things that I've heard is people saying, why even have the Clone Wars at all? And
You have to have
um,
it. He mentions it.
or yes, exactly. There's part of my approach is as much continuity with the original trilogy as possible. But I've noticed some comments. Some people are like, let's question everything, which is, it's not such a bad approach. But
I
that's one
like
of the
how you bookend it, though. I mean, you basically say you have to keep the original trilogy intact.
yes,
And since it's
yes,
mentioned, you have to honor that.
yes.
Whatever's mentioned in that, you have to give Luke and Leia, their sibling status. You have to give the Clone Wars to Darth Vader. And you have to have what's his name, Lars. Oh, he's
Yes,
the uncle.
Owen Lars. Yes,
Owen Lars. Yeah, you have to have that dude in there somehow. You have to have the original trilogy treated like gospel.
exactly. That is definitely. I was just thinking about that again recently. Was that Lucas almost seemed to have his lack of continuity was so sloppy it was borderline contemptuous for the lore that was already established with the original trilogy, and he had said something like he was frustrated with making the prequels in reference to the continuity in the lore, and so you could read between you could figure out what he meant. He was obviously wanting to be more freeformed and creative and not have to do that. And that, I think that was part of the problem, was he just wasn't passionate about Star Wars anymore, at least not
His
writing.
Star Wars. He wanted new Star Wars.
Yes, you would have to do the prequels properly. You would have to have. I think you have to be a huge fan of the original trilogy and love that lore. And he created. So I don't think it means the same to him as other people. So it was just another reason why it was wrong for him to write and direct them himself. He should have just produced
Yeah.
them.
I remember hearing something along the lines of him not even being appreciative of what he created to begin with. He didn't want to be known as a Star Wars guy. He wanted to be known as a
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker. He wanted to make
Yeah.
good films. He wanted to tell stories, and he got pigeonholed into this person that created this world that people loved so
Mm-hmm.
much, and he hated that. He hated it. As far as I remember him saying, it kind of annoyed him that he couldn't just go make movies like his friend Spielberg.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I'm not really sure why he didn't pursue a more Spielbergian approach, or
I don't think he was as talented. I don't think he is as talented as Spielberg, honestly.
maybe. It's hard to say because his output in the 70s was more impressive than what Spielberg was doing in the 70s, but
Are they the same age?
Spielberg definitely eclipsed him very quickly. I'm not really sure if I'm sure in some interview he must have said why he stopped directing. All I know is that making Star Wars was a very taxing experience on him, trying to make that movie. He really threw
Yeah.
his whole heart and soul into
Taxing.
making Star
He's
Wars.
$5 billionaire. I'd like to be taxed like that.
Yeah, he certainly was rewarded for his efforts, but
Yeah.
for that 2 years or so, he really definitely threw himself. He definitely worked that hard, and you can. It's. I think the results speak for themselves as far as, especially if you know how insanely low budget the original Star Wars was. He wanted to make like a $60 million movie in 70s money. That's today the equivalent would be like $100 million or $150 million movie.
Uh-huh.
And he made that movie on, like, I think the original budget was something like 8 or 10 million, and then he got at the last minute he got to finish the effects. He got a few more million, so the end budget was like, I don't know, 16 or 17 million or something. To be able to make that epic on that such a practically shoestring budget in terms of like big studio movies, it's really an incredible feature,
I
incredible
was looking
feat.
at what he already produced by that point too. He was 2 movies into his career, really, as a director. And he
Yes.
had a bunch of shorts, short. Looking at his IMDb, that's all he did. And then all of a sudden, he did THX 1138,
Yes.
which was a remake of a movie that he made in college 4 years
Yep.
prior. And
A
then
short
American
film.
Graffiti, off a short film, right? I've tried to watch THX 1138, and I don't think I actually made it through. Have you seen it?
I've seen it. I remember seeing it mostly just out of interest of Lucas and Star Wars, and I can appreciate it for what it is. It helps if you know that the concept behind it was not, I wouldn't say narrative less, but minimalist narrative, and mostly about the sound design and telling the whole thing visually. And it's kind of like a Blade Runner type movie in that
Interesting.
it's a very atmospheric, and what
I want to
Lucas
watch
does.
it. Robert Duvall is in it.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Lucas calls it pure cinema. In other
Mm,
words, not a bunch of dialogue and exposition, mostly about the visuals and the sound design, and trying to tell and convey as much of the story in the sound effects, the sound design, and the music and the visuals, which is really cool. And if you watch it
yeah.
like that, I think it works. And
And
you
this
can
is
see
right
that in
after
his action scenes
2001.
in Star Wars.
So, I mean, it makes sense that he'd be making this too. It kind of looks like 2001 in a way. Analog,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting. And it's American Zoetrope too, which is not Kubrick.
It's Coppola, which was definitely
Coppola,
his
yeah.
closest collaborator, and Coppola was definitely George Lucas's Yoda
I think he even
in his
worked on
life.
Godfather too, didn't he? Let's see. I'm gonna go back here.
Yes, he supposedly he did there was a newspaper montage sequence in Godfather, and Lucas did that. Lucas started out as an editor. He was an editor on some of Coppola's earliest films, and Lucas to this day says that editing is his favorite part of the process.
That's so funny, being he did not edit Star Wars. He's never actually edited anything though, except for Journey to the Pacific. And that was one of his earlier documentary things.
Who didn't edit?
Spielberg, not
Oh,
Spielberg.
Spiel.
Lucas.
Oh no, Lucas
Oh no,
edited.
I'm sorry. He has 19 credits on his.
Yes, yes. Lucas is a big editor, huge editor. He's edited all of his films, I think.
Yeah, looks like it.
Um, anyway, the point that I was going to make is that in wake of the prequels, a lot of people have tried to rewrite history, basically revisionist history, try and make Lucas not into the genius that he is considered, and try and take away credit for the original trilogy, which is just nonsense. It's not what happened. What happened is that in the 70s, he was a very collaborative filmmaker, and he took input from his wife and his producer Gary Kurtz and Coppola and Spielberg and all his directing friends. Brian De Palma wrote the opening scroll to Star Wars, the original Star Wars.
So
So
interesting.
it was the exact opposite environment from what he created with the prequels, where he was surrounded by yes men, and there was nobody there to question him or challenge his ideas. And that's we got these very and his passion for the franchise had waned, and that's the films we got, and it's it's expected.
That's very fascinating, honestly, because he was still friends with those people. Spielberg was definitely in
Yeah,
his life still. I've heard stories of them hanging out and playing video games or this, that, and the other thing. I mean, they're definitely
they're still
intertwined.
very close,
Still very
but
close friendship, but I think because they have their own careers, they're worth billions of dollars themselves. I mean, the people that he was associating with, they weren't able to drop their projects and come on board and guide
mhm.
him and hold his hand or whatever he needed. I mean, it's an interesting question. Have you asked yourself what it would have taken for these movies to have been good? Would people have to just put their foot down, or I mean, how did his wife? I mean, his wife, relationship with his wife was obviously very contestuous.
If I could change
They didn't
one, oh
make it.
yes, he divorced. He went through a divorce during. Actually, I think him and Spielberg both went through a divorce when they made Temple of Doom, and they say that's why that movie's so dark. Although I think that movie's great, so I kind
Yeah,
of
right.
disagree that the movie's bad. But yeah, supposedly they went through a
I don't
pretty.
get that, man. It's like one of my favorite ones as a kid. I'd watch it over and over
Yes,
again.
yeah, I love it, but I didn't. It wasn't a hit, so I think they were looking for a reason to kind of an excuse. But yeah, he went through a divorce in after Return of the Jedi. And yeah, that definitely seems to have changed him somewhat. It's hard to say. I think Lucas was still a great filmmaker, primarily a producer in the '80s, and made all these great movies, from Raiders of the Lost Ark all the way to the end, book into the '80s with Last Crusade.
Yeah.
And in between, made some really great movies. But if I could change one thing about the prequels, it would be that George would have just produced them and not wrote or directed them. It should have really been in the hands of some super fan, some young, hungry director, up and coming director in the late '90s. Anyone would have killed to done that movie. It seemed like the his director buddies that were of his generation, they were the ones that didn't want to touch the property. People like um, Ron Howard recently, a couple of years ago, I think, admitted that he was offered one of the prequels and turned it down because he didn't want the responsibility of living up
Yeah.
to the hype.
You're talking about destroying your career, right? If you mess up one of those movies,
Yeah,
I mean, it obviously didn't destroy George Lucas's career, but it came close, right? I mean, it destroyed his reputation.
I would say it kind of. I would say it kind of did destroy his
Right. Okay.
career.
I would
I
agree.
could.
It
I
definitely
could.
did no good for him. In terms of like his
I
quality,
think
he
it
turned into a
destroyed his.
joke.
I think it destroyed his legacy.
Yeah.
I think that the original trilogy and all of his early success just made him into a legend, and I think he destroyed his legacy with the prequels. And
And turned him into a
it
joke.
reminds me of one of my favorite yeah, and turned him into a joke. Reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from the documentary The People versus George Lucas. Somebody said something that just blew me away. I couldn't believe I didn't think of it. One of the interviewees said, "Hey Lucas, if you want to fix something," in reference to the special editions, "if you want to fix something, fix the prequels. Those are the movies that are broken. Stop messing with the classic films that everyone loves." And I was like, man, why didn't I think of that? That is a great point. Like,
Why doesn't he though? That's the problem. Most of those
yes,
films still exist in some kind of digital archive. You can take things out, move them around. That's the funny thing. You could probably retell a whole different movie if you would just, you know, do it.
that leads me to another great point. Is a lot of people there's a million fan cuts of the prequels out there. People
Was it
constantly
what's the guy's name? The one who was in the
Topher
70s
Grace
show.
is
Yeah,
we're
I
doing
really
one.
would like to watch his.
Yeah,
He
well,
dropped the whole trilogy down to like 90 minutes or something like that. I don't,
supposedly,
yeah,
and there are fan cuts that fit his description completely. So you can just watch one of the fan cuts that I'm sure are basically the same thing. And
you
I'm
have to
really
download
frustrated.
them, right? It's like you have to torrent
A
the
bunch of them
copies,
are on
or
YouTube. You can just watch them on YouTube, weirdly
oh,
enough.
really?
And I always was very frustrated with those because the biggest problem with the prequels is like if you listen to people's suggestions about what to change or what to cut, they basically just like cut out everything until you're left with nothing. And that's
Yeah.
not how you fix these movies. These movies are fundamentally flawed at their very core. You cannot polish a turd, which is why I find these fan cuts so frustrating. You can't fix bad acting, terrible dialogue with editing. You
You know,
have to
the acting
reshoot.
didn't really bother me. Yeah, it was really the computer animation. I do not like computer animation. Let's do this. I have your rewrite up. Give me the elevator spiel for the Scion of the Force, if you can. Do you know what that is? Basically, you have a number of floors. I'm on an elevator with you. Give me the story as quickly as you possibly can, so we can catch back up and move on from where we stopped last time.
Okay, so let's see. We made it to when we were going through the bullet points.
No, no, from beginning to end. Give me the story. Like you're trying to sell it to me. You don't have a lot of time. Sell it to me.
That okay. This might be harder than just
It
going
is
through
hard.
the bullet
It's
points.
incredibly difficult. I can't do
Um,
it. If you ask me what my novel's about, I will tell you in exactly 67,000 words, which is exactly what it took to write it. I cannot do this. But, I mean, what do we have? We have a plot that starts how?
yes. The first thing I would say is if there's writers listening to this, they would know what I mean when I say lean into that hero's journey structure. Anakin as a character. He's the main character. He's the audience surrogate. He's the main protagonist. He needs to be heroic. He shouldn't be like Damien in the Omen. He should be clearly good. Because if he's not clearly good at the beginning, then who cares if he turns evil at the end? Because if he was already a disturbed child at the beginning, okay, well, who cares then? There's no story. So that's where you start. And should I do? Should I
Yeah.
explain what the hero's journey is?
No,
The
no, no.
whole
We don't
Martin
need
Camp,
that part. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
the whole Joseph Campbell thing. But it basically just means that the hero who starts from humble beginnings and then finds out that they're special in some way. Maybe they have abilities. Maybe
so
they
okay.
are.
So Anakin Skywalker starts from humble beginnings on the Corellia, right? And
You're right.
finds out that he's special how?
And then so he in my rewrite he's actually made a name for himself. He's kind of famous for being a pilot, being a racer, a sky racer, sky pilot, and Obi-Wan Kenobi comes and finds him. It's not like happenstance as it is in the original. So the Jedi figure out that this kid's probably got the Force, and they are desperate for new recruits because they haven't found any Force sensitive younglings in like maybe 10 or 20 years. So they seek out Anakin. They find him. Obi-Wan rescues him at a key moment.
Who rescues him?
Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan. And is
Obi-Wan
that the
Kenobi.
call to adventure? Is his being rescued by Obi-Wan?
Well, the call to adventure would be right after that. He would offer to him and say, you're able to do this because you have the Force, and he explains what the Force is and says, I'm here to offer you to train as a Jedi. That would be the call to adventure. And
Is
he should.
Obi-Wan McGregor? Is he still, a 30-year-old dude, or is he a
Well,
little
in
bit
episode
older? How
one,
old is he?
he needs to be a bit older. In episode one, he's too young. He's about 23 or something in episode one. And in order to fit the timeline, he needs to really be in his late 30s. He needs to be about 38, give or take.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. That's interesting.
another
So I
that
like an
that's another
older,
great.
more wiser Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's the supernatural aide, right? He's the guy who basically will guide
He's definitely
Anakin
the wise
Skywalker.
man,
Okay.
and you could kind of say the Force is kind of the supernatural aid in a way, but it's kind of all mixed together as because he's a wizard. So Anakin also needs to be older. The story, one of the major flaws of episode 1 is how young Anakin is. He's just a kid, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
horrible.
compelling if your protagonist
Well, we
is
talked about that last time where he's the
Mhm.
MacGuffin, right? I mean, he's not even a thing. He's not even a person that can act on his own. He's just this kind of thing
Yes,
that they find and kind of pull through the story.
yes.
Okay, so
And
we have
having
this.
an active protagonist is
It's very important,
very important,
and we had it in
essential
Star
to a
Wars. We had
compelling story.
Luke Skywalker was a very important part of that story, and
Yes,
that's why people love him because he had an impact on the actual story itself. And I think
yes,
the only things that Anakin Skywalker, just to go back to the original, not the original, but the prequels, the the George Lucas prequels, is the only thing
yep.
Anakin does. He wins the podcast, or not podcast, the pod racing thing, and he shoots the thing in the space station or whatever.
Yes,
That's
and
basically all
pretty
he
much
does.
accidentally. Yeah.
And he's comic fodder, just like the droids. I mean, he doesn't really do
Yes,
anything. He's a cute little kid that's life is going to be destroyed because he was in this movie,
exactly.
ultimately. So now,
Yeah, poor
in
Jake
the
Lloyd.
heroes, what's that?
Yeah, poor Jake Lloyd. He also had
Yeah,
his life
God,
destroyed by
man,
these terrible
it's so
things.
sad.
Yeah, I feel
He's
bad
not
for
going to
that
end up
guy.
as a Mark Hamill. He's not going to be a Harrison Ford. He's this poor guy with mental problems because he was in a movie when he was a kid.
Yeah, that's another thing that I hate is people who blame Jake Lloyd or Hayden Christensen as if it was their fault, and I don't agree with that at all.
Okay, so now we have the supernatural aid. Anakin Skywalker's call to adventure. He's one of the few that have Jedi powers. He's loaded with metachlorians, right?
Yeah, definitely cut the metachlorians. Cut the
They're not coming out of his eyeballs in this movie
I
that you're
was
trying to make.
never really convinced with the whole metachlorian things.
Oh man, I did not mind. It didn't really hit me that it was dumb, but it was kind of like, huh, that's not really the Force. That's not a living thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, he has no metachlorians. He is a Jedi. The Jedi come and find him. Anakin Skywalker is his supernatural aide, the wizard, and he's going to pull him into the adventure. And the next part of the hero's journey is the Threshold Guardians. That's the beginning of the transformation.
Yes. I'm not sure if what's a good example of a threshold guardian, because I guess
Huh.
that can be any challenge, right? So there's definitely a bunch of challenges he
I don't know. Would
faces.
you say, like in a fantasy story, maybe the hero is being asked to join, but yet he's held back by a sense of responsibility for his family or his wife or his kid or
Yeah, well,
something
that would be
along those lines?
the reluctant hero aspect, and we were talking earlier about that. Is you can have a protagonist who is reluctant. You can even have a protagonist who is very reluctant and pulled along until the third act. During the moment of crisis, if your protagonist doesn't become an active protagonist and choose to save the day, then the story doesn't work. And you can kind of see that in the Phantom Menace, where Anakin is just bumbling he's kind of Mr. Magooing his way through to saving the day there. That's a great example of how the story just doesn't work. So yeah, Anakin has to actively decide to become in my draft. Did you get a chance to read the full summary
I
of
read what you
Science?
had on Sci-Fi Writers, but I also remember we talked about how he was a not a pod racer because you wanted to get it off the ground. He was a sky racer or something along those
Yes,
lines.
yes. He has to be.
It'd
That's
be
another part of the
interesting.
lore that
It would be
has to
interesting,
be
Skywalker,
established.
man.
Is
That would be such a cool thing because his name comes from the fact that he actually looks like he's walking on the sky when he's winning these things. But
right.
I was thinking maybe because he was in these races, maybe his Threshold Guardian is the underworld bosses that give him the finances necessary to run these races or something along those lines, trying to prevent
Yeah, that
their
could be.
meal ticket from leaving.
Sure, that fits too. Uh, I forget what I was going to say. There was something about in the draft. Anyway, yes, part of the lore is that it's important that he is a pilot, because Obi-Wan says when I first met Anakin, he was already a great pilot. So they kind of fudge it in the Phantom Menace with he's just a ground racer. Those pods they hover, they don't really fly. And so I wanted to make him real planes that actually fly, kind of like stunt racers, which I don't know if you've seen them, but they're quite spectacular. If you've seen footage of stunt racers, these like single engine prop planes that can do
Yeah,
these amazing turns, and that's kind of what I imagined for like these death defying races in the sky, kind of like a more like a roller coaster ride. Just you can do a better job than the pod racers by just throwing it into the sky, and then he's a real pilot, and it fits the lore much better.
And
I'm
also, if
sorry
you
if
put
it
it,
sounds like I have a cold. I think I
no,
might
it's
be
okay.
getting a cold.
Yeah, I feel you, man. It's like I just had a horrible respiratory thing. My kids are constantly getting me sick. I took Mucinex. They're not supporting the
Yeah,
podcast,
my whole family is sick, and I'm might actually finally have gotten the cold that or
Mucinex,
flu
man.
that they
Take
have.
it. Take it. It helped me so much. I was like, oh, I'm not even sick anymore. But
Oh, really?
anyway,
Wow.
yeah, it was like, dude, I had like all the pains in my neck and my chest. I was like, I'm getting sick. And I took it for like 2 days and it dried me up. It was really awesome. Um, so what else do we have? The hero's journey. How
Okay.
does this movie progress? We're past the threshold, whatever that's going to be. You don't know necessarily 100%.
Well, okay, so I should also point out that one of the other things that's really important to my rewrite is the in the prequels the tension was very low because the Jedi was so strong, so overpowered, and the villains were not that scary and not
Well, there
like
weren't any
especially the Trade
villains, right? I
Federation,
mean, were the
especially the
Sith
Trade
out?
Federation.
Were
The Sith were okay, but the Trade Federation were very weak villains. Hardly
oh my
anything. I
God,
mean,
forget
they're
about
just
it.
utter pushovers. That's a big problem in the story.
But in terms
So
of
for
your
my
story,
version,
though, who is your villain? Anakin himself, right? He's a nice villain in terms of like the opposite of his protagonism.
well, I've retained Darth Maul and Palpatine
Okay. Okay.
as the who becomes the Emperor,
And when
and
do they come into the story?
well, I've kind of retained. Well, Maul is probably Maul is actually much more prominent in my version
I hope so.
as
That
the
was the most
main. He's really
disappointing
the
for
main villain,
good.
and Palpatine's kind of in the background. I think you see more of him in my version than in Phantom
You would
Menace.
want to keep him hidden though, wouldn't you? For like at least the
Yes, yeah,
first
he's
movie,
not.
if not first
Yes,
and a half.
yeah, he still stays in the shadows, so that aspect is still there. You don't
Do
want
you
to
have
spoil too much.
what's his name? Emperor not Emperor, Senator, whatever his name is, and then before he becomes Darth
Yeah, Senator Palpatine.
Sidious. Yeah,
Yes,
do you have Palpatine?
that's all still there.
Palpatine
Yes, except he's everything is moved from Naboo to Alderaan, so he'd be the senator from Alderaan instead of Naboo, and
makes
he's
total sense.
yeah, and there's not nearly as many. I think there might be one Senate scene at most, and it's very quick, and so you kind of skip over the politics. If a great if you want to talk politics in Star Wars, that's another thing that Lucas botched is that my approach was that you can do politics, you can have political consequences to the battles, and you can do politics, have the character, they can experience the politics firsthand through the main characters. They can experience it, and then thus the audience can see it happening firsthand, as opposed to, C-SPAN, space, C-SPAN, C-SPAN in space, which is kind of the Lucas approach to doing politics, which just doesn't work.
You want to keep it's an action movie. I mean, it's not.
Right.
You want to make a politics movie, make a politics movie. But we want to show
Yeah,
up.
you
We
can
want to
have.
watch laser sword fights, and we want to watch
Yeah.
blaster fights. I mean, this is what we had in the original trilogy. This is what we're having in the sequels now. Is more laser fights and
Yeah,
laser
it's
guns or
called
whatever.
Star Wars, so
Star Wars.
it
It's not
should
called
have.
politic debate.
Yeah, it's not called star politics. So you
Yeah,
can have the battles determine the political outcomes instead of having, Senate debates that
but you need that guy
dictate the
because he's
plot.
important.
It's essential to show the rise of the empire to kind of touch on this stuff, but there's much smarter ways to do it. And if you read the
Well,
drafts,
what's a smarter way to do it? How are you?
um,
Because I mean, now we have to show the bad guys, right? I mean, we've started the adventure. We've started Anakin on his way. He gets past the threshold guardians. What's it called? Fade or sweep fade, and we have to show the bad guys
well, the other
interacting
point that
with
I
other
was going
good
to make
guys.
is the villains need to be scarier, and the heroes need to be they need to be underdogs. So my Jedi Order is old and aging. They're graying Jedi. They've got long beards instead of these super overpowered like. They're basically like Greek gods in the prequels. They're
But of course, you're going to have Yoda doing backflips and stuff, right?
well, there's another great example of how Yoda's there's another major change. Yoda is
So what
cut
are you
out
saying? He went
of the
from
prequels.
he didn't go from physically fit to being decrepit in 30 years or 20 years actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's another problem that I have with people say that to try and hand wave the problem of Yoda. They say, "Oh, he changed in between the movies," and
He
well,
had cancer.
the guy's 800 years old. I don't know any 80-year-olds who changed that much, let alone 800-year-olds.
All right. I mean, the guy, I love what they did in The Last Jedi, where his
Yeah,
effigy was a puppet. Again, we're returning back to The Empire Strikes Back, and you get to see a puppet. It's like
yeah.
that's what Yoda is, not that computer animated crap they had in the prequel.
Yes, I agree. Yes, a healthy mix of practical and CG, and if the CG isn't convincing, then why have it at all? Just do it right. And
I mean,
the
there's
new movies
practical
seem
so
to
much
get
more
that.
fun.
So you want underdog heroes, and you want scary, nearly overpowered villains, and that's definitely a hallmark of the original trilogy. And
Yeah.
you need more of that in the prequels in order to have a high tension movie. You need to keep the tension high. You need to have things to be exciting, and the stakes need to be high. And all of that is missing in the prequels, which is really weird because that's kind of like storytelling 101.
So how do you introduce Darth Maul?
My movie opens very differently. The original Phantom Menace opens incredibly boring. uh, it's like a trade negotiation is basically how it starts. Mine opens with a big action sequence, and Maul and Sidious are attacking this outpost, and you jump right into the action, cut right and straight into the action, and you establish these villains as scary and violent, and you can just that kind of catapults the whole story right off the get-go. It's an old writing trick.
What reason do they have to attack the outpost?
Um, in my well, it's I would say just read the drafts because it's that's complicated. It kicks off a plot thread that kind of drives throughout the entire prequel trilogy. I'll leave that as a surprise for readers who want to make the journey to the full drafts.
Are you thinking about potentially writing this as a novel?
I'm not. I haven't decided yet if it should be screenplays would be perhaps the most logical way to
If
adapt
you're
that.
gonna make a movie, but we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars here. But novels are free; you could do whatever you want with them.
Oh yeah. Yes. I think I like prose. It's easier to read. Screenplays are not particularly fun to read. I don't think.
Good
But
ones
yeah, good ones can be. So I'm I'm not married to either idea at this point. There's advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. Mostly at this point, I'm really interested in illustrating the stories uh, for what they are at this point. And so if I had storyboards and concept art to go with what exists now, I think that would be great. And I could put it on like a website and present it like as if it was a nice printed book or concept proposal.
are. Okay, so you're not gonna explain the beginning of the movie, so we're moving on. You're
Well, I
gonna move.
would, but it's just the beginning plot thread of the entire saga. We don't have time to go into the whole thing.
So what do you want to spend time on?
Okay, so well, let's continue the thought train that we were on, where Anakin is brought to Coruscant. That's still the same, but one of the things I've changed is I've moved the Jedi Temple off of Coruscant and put it on a forest moon around Coruscant, and there's lots of reasons why. The big reason why is I wanted to get back to one of the early.
How do you introduce that?
Um, Obi-Wan takes Anakin to Coruscant, and they see Coruscant a little bit, and then they talk about the Force and stuff, and the Jedi, and eventually, of course, Anakin says, "Okay, so where's the Jedi Temple?" And Obi-Wan says, "It's in the sky." And then they journey to the moon, and the concept there is if Coruscant is like a sprawling mega city, then the Forest Moon would be like Central Park. If you logically scale up like a mega city like New York City, then it would make sense that an entire moon would be like the park equivalent of the megacity. It's like a forest preserve, and the concept, the underlying concept, is a theme that was trilogy, was that the force is connected to life, and life and wildlife is very connected to the force, and Obi-Wan even goes as far as to say that life creates it's an energy field created by all living things, is what Obi-Wan says, and then Yoda reiterates that by saying that life creates the force and makes it
But I
grow.
thought Obi-Wan was with Anakin. When does this interaction take place?
Well, this is from the original trilogy when Obi-Wan says that.
Okay, so how do you introduce this planet? Do you planet hop?
Well,
Get there?
it's just a moon of Coruscant.
No, I mean what you're showing the movie though. So how do you get to this planet, this moon over
They
at
just traveled
Coruscant?
it. They just traveled from
So they're
Coruscant
going there
to the
easily.
moon. Yes, and
No, nothing's gonna stop them. They get to the moon and then they have a conversation with the Jedi.
well, this is all intercut with what's happening on Alderaan, so there's quite a lot going on. It's really a fully fleshed out. I'm trying to give you the short version of this. Because there's so much I'm skipping, but the part that I wanted to explain was that the idea that the force is connected to living things is lost in the prequels, and I wanted to get back to that as a contrast of, you know, the cold dead dark side, all is machines and metal, and the Empire is like that, and contrast that with the Jedi, which should be surrounded by plants and forest, and that theme that was started in the original trilogy. I wanted to, you know, embrace that, and it's so much more interesting, I think, if there's an entire moon of nothing but trees and forests, and you can. I'd imagine it as kind of like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
But
Or
do you plan on revealing Yoda in your prequel?
No, Yoda doesn't appear at all in my prequel trilogy in order to preserve his reveal in Empire Strikes Back, which a lot of people forget is a reveal. You're not supposed to know what Yoda looks like.
Or yeah, you're kind of surprised there. You don't even know who he is. This kind of
Yes, and I
green
think it
frog.
works.
You're like, huh, what is this thing?
Right. And I think it works better if he's hyped up across multiple movies instead of just mentioned in Empire in the beginning of that movie, and then you see him the next act. It doesn't. I think it would work so much better if he was hyped across multiple movies and you finally hear the name again and you're like, oh, and then you can't wait to see, what is this guy, this greatest Jedi in history? What does he look
Well, the
like?
problem with the prequels is you already know who Yoda is, right? I mean, you're
Right.
not watching the prequels saying, "Oh, I wonder what comes next." You know the three movies that are going to follow. It's not
Yes.
exciting. I mean, I think
Right.
you mentioned this. It's not exciting. You know what happens to Anakin. You
Yeah, if
know
you
it.
want to talk
It's
about
not
big
exciting.
changes, that's the two big ones are preserving both big reveals in Empire Strikes Back. Empire's major two big reveals are what Yoda looks like, that the greatest Jedi in the galaxy is this little Muppet thing. That's a big reveal that is, you know, you see Yoda everywhere now, so people don't seem to even care. But I still strongly believe that these movies should work as movies on their own. And the other big one is, of course, the famous "Look, I am your father," and that's the other thing that I'm trying to fix in this whole prequel trilogy. The major change is not showing Anakin get in the Vader suit in order to preserve that reveal.
But we know it though. That's the problem, isn't it? We already know all that stuff. Having the prequels makes no sense because the story already kind of works itself out. The hero being Anakin, he's a bad guy. You know what happens to him. He becomes Darth Vader. We want to know how Anakin became Darth Vader, and there's no protecting that, right? There's no fixing it. There's no making it
No,
stop. I mean, we have to have Darth Vader. I think that's primarily the biggest problem with the prequels is it's not interesting watching something that you know is going to happen. We worry about spoilers all the time. You know, what's the spoiler of this movie? Don't spoil this
right.
movie for me. Don't do this. Don't do that. And we know what's going to happen. This dude has to become that dude. That dude has to have sex with somebody to produce the brother and sister. You know, Obi-Wan Kenobi is going to live because he dies in the first movie of the original serial.
Yeah.
What's it called? Trilogy. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing is going to happen exciting to any of these characters at all. except for maybe Darth Maul. And that's the only one we don't know what's going to happen to. Or even Obi-Wan's master. We don't know what's going to happen to him either because he's a new guy. We need to fall in love with people and worry about their safety. And Anakin's not one of those people because we know who he's going to end up being. We know Obi-Wan's going to die. We know Yoda's going to die at some point in the original trilogy. So I mean,
Yeah,
how do we build emotion up in a prequel where nobody matters? I mean, the main characters, you know how their story wraps up.
Yeah, I think that's a big flaw with the other major flaw that no one talks about is Yoda actually literally just gives up in his fight with the Emperor in Revenge of the Sith because he
You
has to
mentioned how
survive.
that
He
was
has to
kind of,
stay
yeah,
alive.
he had to say that. I think that's where it comes from actually, is you're mentioning the fact that that character has to be in The Empire Strikes Back. You know
Yeah,
when he shows up, and you know in Return of the Jedi the guy's going to be all even worse off because for some reason that species dies really quickly after they reach the age of backflips and
yeah.
whatnot.
So Yoda being there is really just fan service. When you could just invent a new Jedi Master character, you can invent as many Jedi characters as you want. There's absolutely no reason to have Yoda there. It's just mindless fan service. It doesn't
Mhm.
work at all, and in fact, it breaks the universe. But yeah, I mean, if you read my whole summary, you don't even have to read the full summaries. You can just read all my bullet points. I think you can see how I've worked as hard as I possibly can to make these films work in order, and even if you've seen the original trilogy, I think it still works much better because of the approach that I'm taking of, what if these were planned out properly from the beginning? They should work in viewing in episode order. And I really do believe that if you make a great movie or tell a great story, even if you know how it ends, it's still compelling if it's well done. Um, the big example for me is the movie Apollo 13. I think that movie is phenomenal, and the fact that you know what's going to happen, even though the first time I saw the movie I knew they would live, I don't think that hurts that movie at all because it's a great movie. And I feel the same way about the prequels, is that it's primarily that they sucked. You know what's going to happen. That doesn't help, but it's I think it's emphasized, and it's highlighted by the fact that they suck highlights the fact that, oh, I don't care about any of this and I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's my problem too. I didn't realize that was my problem until just now. And it really does come from your idea of Yoda. I mean, it is just fan service. Darth Vader is just fan service. Obi-Wan Kenobi is just fan service.
Yeah, showing him get in the suit is just a way to sell Vader toys, and it ruins the plot, ruins the story. And the idea that if Lucas wants to argue that he made films that work in episode order, is just it's just a lie, I guess. It's because it doesn't work at all. I don't buy that at all.
So I wonder if you even have those characters. I mean, we know they exist in this world, but who are the most compelling people in this world? I mean, who are the ones that you actually want to care about? Are there
Yeah.
anybody? Do we even need to tell the story because we know what happens? That's my problem. I think now you broke it for me, man. Do we even need prequels to
Well,
begin with?
I've seen comments like that where people say, the idea of the backstory is they don't find it compelling, or they don't even like the
How
concept
can
of
you make it
prequels.
compelling? That's my problem. How
Yeah,
do you make it compelling?
I, yeah, I mean, if you, I definitely don't have that perspective. I think you can still make great movies even if you know what the ending is. I mean, they've actually done studies where they say people enjoy books more if they know what's going to happen. It's because of a weird quirk in our psychology. So I really don't buy when people say that, the very concept of a prequel doesn't work. It's really, I think, just how well executed it is, because you can enjoy a TV show if you watch the episodes out of order. It can still be a great show, even if you watch it out of order. It
I
doesn't
don't know.
make the show terrible just
If
because
you
you know it's
watch
going
the
to happen.
last episode of Lost, I mean, are you gonna watch the entire thing disappointed that they're in purgatory?
Well, I don't know if it works for every single show.
Exactly. And I don't think I mean ultimately like we were talking about at the beginning, the hero's journey is a cliche, right? I mean, it's gonna work out in a certain way. Either the hero is gonna live or he's gonna sacrifice himself because he's a hero. He's not gonna walk off with a gold and say, you know what, guys, go screw yourselves. I'm off to live the life of whoever rich guy you want to put in that situation. You know he's going to survive. So I mean, at the beginning of the story, you're already bored, knowing that at the end, no matter what he goes through, he's either going to win or he's going to help the team that you consider good win. Because the good guys win, the bad guys don't win. Whether the bad guys. And in this
Yes,
story, you know the bad guys are going to lose. You know that Darth Vader is going to, do that head swivel, look from Luke to the Emperor, and go, you know what? I'm going to kill the Emperor.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've noticed that from just studying writing, while I've been writing this, I've been studying story structure a lot, and there's really only three endings to any story. There's the comedy, which is a happy ending, the
Yeah.
tragedy, and the ambiguous ending. There's really, when you realize that there's really only three endings, I think you stop worrying about, uh, you know,
It
surprising
is the
the
journey, though,
audience.
isn't it? It is the
Yeah,
journey.
it's more about the
Climbing
journey.
the mountain.
Yeah, yeah. The journey is the medium is the message, and the journey is the point.
So we get rid of Jar Jar. We get rid of midichlorians. We start the movie on Alderaan. We introduce Obi-Wan, who's been instructed by the Jedis to get this Force-sensitive person into their fold so that they can mold him into a knight of nothing to do because there are no bad guys in this world right now that we know of. But then we have not Darth Sidious.
We have
Yeah, we have
Maul,
Maul. We have Darth
and you have Sidious unseen in the background. So the Sith
in the
are
background.
definitely the villains.
So at some
But
point in
you
the
just
first
don't have these
movie,
Trade
this
Federation. You don't have
this
these weak.
utopia that the Jedi are living in has to be shattered beyond any kind of recognition. Their world has to be blown up because the way we're presenting it, the Jedi are living in utopia. They have a perfect
Yes.
living situation on this moon,
hmm
and
It's kind
then
of like in Eden. Yes.
in Eden, right? I mean, so who spoils it for them? Who gets them out of their comfort zone? And why don't they just remain in their comfort zone? Because I think that's one of the things in the original trilogy, not the original, the prequels, is they were kind of lost in their own magnificence. We're the Jedi. We don't have anybody that can hurt us. We're just going to be in our little temple, training our little kids, influencing politics, and there are no bad guys.
Yes. So the big event in mine, in my rewrite, is in episode 2. The Clone Wars break out, and it starts with an assassination of the Supreme Chancellor, and Palpatine rises to become the new Supreme Chancellor, and you can start to see the chess pieces that he's putting in place, and he's using war as his ultimate trump card to get the Republic to join the war, and he successfully does it by assassinating. In my script, he Mandalorians to assassinate the Supreme Chancellor, and it's a 1-2 punch because he becomes the new Supreme Chancellor, and it convinces the Republic to join the fighting in the Outer Rim, or the Mid Rim in my story, and where there's already fighting going on. And so in my story, Tarkin, or there's a division within the Jedi as to whether or not they should get involved, because they're all old guys and they don't. I have dialogue that references the concept that many people in the Republic think that the age of the endless wars is over. Is a bit of dialogue that I have in there to kind of show where the Republic is at this point. And there's a division within the Jedi as to whether or not they should get involved in the war, which becomes the Clone Wars. And then in my script, Tarkin shows up. Is a younger Tarkin, who's the admiral of one of the top ranking admirals in the Republic, and he goes to the Jedi and offers them to please join, please help the war effort, and he's able to convince them by saying, you will not, or the head of the Jedi Orders rebukes him and says, we will not be pawns. We are not, we don't embrace violence. We're keepers of peace. We enforce the peace. And then his rebuttal is, you guys will not be pawns. We will make you generals, and you will command armies, and you will be giving the orders. And so he's able to convince Obi-Wan and Anakin and the younger Jedi to join in, and that causes a division, a split in the Jedi Order. And that's you can see, as you were saying, the downfall of the Jedi. There's the first big step, is towards the downfall of the Jedi, as you see it there. And actually, an even better, it actually, there's a scene before that where Anakin is actually, it's set up at the beginning of episode 2, that Anakin is ready to go off and train under Yoda on a towards a secret planet, which we eventually find out is Dagobah, but we don't know what the secret planet is. We just hear them talking about Yoda, about how Anakin is ready to become a Jedi Knight, and to do so he must train under Yoda, and if he meets Yoda's approval, he will be allowed to become a Jedi Knight. And so he's preparing to leave, and then all this violence breaks out, and the Chancellor's assassinated, and then they need him for the war effort because he's the youngest and the most powerful Jedi. So they decide to defer his training, and Obi-Wan steps in and says, "You know what? I'll complete your training while we fight in the war." And that is the other big step in that direction towards not just Anakin's downfall, but the eventual downfall of the Jedi and the Republic.
So that does not happen in the first movie, though.
No, this is all the beginning of episode 2. But you mentioned, how do the Jedi begin to fall? There's how episode 2 begins.
So what? I just, how do you get from the first movie to the second movie, or is it just going to be one of those?
Well, in my story, the only major other big change is you switch Naboo to Alderaan, and so I changed Padme into a princess. So they're much closer in age. The romance works, and then Maul attacks Alderaan, holds the princess hostage, and then Anakin and Obi-Wan kind of are the Jedi send them in to save the day, and it plays out not too differently structurally, but filmically or story-wise, it's pretty different from the Phantom Menace. But essentially, the long and short of it, the short version is that he saves the princess, saves the day, cuts them all in half, which that's the same, and they save Alderaan. So at the major one of the most important change would be that at the end, Anakin and the princess sneak off and have share a secret kiss, and it kind of sets up the romance that episode 2 is heavily based around their romance. That's the major change. But other than that, Act 3 is pretty straightforward as far as them fighting Maul. Maul has a super weapon. They destroy the super weapon, and he cuts Maul in half. And it's the big picture is pretty similar.
So it pretends like there's not going to be a sequel.
That's a good point. Episode 1 actually thematically since it's the most hero's journey. It's similar to A New Hope. It's very much a hero's journey. It's more self-contained. It does feel more like a standalone story. I think it does kind of work like that. But there's hints of a sequel.
It's interesting. You mentioned legends here. Is that a reference to the EU, the extended universe?
No,
what
it is not.
By legends?
That's another big point that I tried to make, was that the prequels, one of the biggest problems with the prequels is how small it felt. You didn't have allusions to the larger lore, larger backstory. That's one of the things that I wanted to try and do, was reference more unseen backstory and lore in the background, references to the old Sith Empire and the old glory days of the old Jedi, and the old wars, the age of the endless wars. Just almost naturally, I didn't really even have to try very hard, but these concepts just kind of fell into the writing. The way my Jedi talk, it's an old galaxy, which I don't get that feeling from watching the prequels of lore.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Coloring the background the way the original trilogy felt like an old galaxy.
The prequels definitely tried to put as much kind of lore into things as possible. Sum things up give answers to things like the force is caused by midichlorians, and
Mhm.
this
Yeah,
group
in
of
a bad
people
way.
is, yeah, it was not good in terms of how clogged it felt. Just
Yeah,
everything was
that's
trying to be forced through this hole of cinematic storytelling, but that hole is very small. And I think that's one of the things the original trilogies kind of really did a good job on, is it did have this sense of there's a lot out there,
uh
and yeah, it's really freaking interesting, but we're not going to really get into it because we're going to let you use your imagination on that one. And then the prequels came out and ruined it.
yeah,
And then the movies that are coming out now are kind of going back into that same kind of mindset where
uh
there's a big universe out there and a lot's going on, but you can go screw yourself. We're not going to tell you what it is.
Yeah, I agree that the Metachlorians are a great example of that. It's a huge mistake to try and explain the Force as like a scientific concept or in scientific terms. The whole concept of the Force works as a mysterious element, the mysterious element in the Star Wars lore, in the Star Wars galaxy, in the whole universe. And I think the only way the Force works is if you embrace the fact that it's largely unexplained. And if the more you explain it, the worse it gets.
So yeah, exactly. The more you explain, the less enjoyable the story is.
Yeah.
Exposition is never good. You want action. You want constant action. You definitely don't want people sitting around talking about their world.
Mhm. Yeah. The one thing
You
I don't
definitely,
want to explain is the exact way the Force works. I think, yeah, you want to leave it ambiguous.
have the opportunity when they're on their little moon to show how the force works.
You want to give them
Show.
give the audience enough that they kind of get it, but you want to leave it enough so that it still feels mysterious and magical.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, the lore, the audience is already going to be pulling in their own kind of interpretation of it. And there's
Yeah.
arguments forever, for decades at this point, about what this means and what that means. I think that's what Star Wars kind of does really well, is it brings in its own pre-existing story. And I'm not even talking about the prequels, I'm talking about the original trilogy. It brought in its own original story that wasn't even there. People are arguing about the nuances of this and that for so long that things just got built up. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, back when there wasn't an internet and you had to buy the Star Wars magazine and sit around with your friends discussing things,
Yes.
people had their ideas, and they brought those preconceived notions in with them. I think that's why people hate the prequels. Not that they're a bad story; they just tried to sum things up that people felt really strongly about for most
Yeah.
of their lives.
Yeah, it was a lot of things that were explained that should have been explained. A lot of backstory for characters that didn't need backstory. Yeah, the wrong things were focused on. So many poor decisions. It's really quite baffling.
Yeah, I
But
mean, good
yeah, I agree.
storytelling, you let your audience kind of fill in those gaps.
Yes, you have to know what to explain and what not, and you did a good job if you get people talking. And if they keep talking for 30 years, you probably did it right.
Yeah, but we've been complaining for almost 30 years. It would be interesting to see this written out as a novel or more of a screenplay. You said you have or have not written the screenplay yet.
I've got treatments for episode 1 and 2. I'm still working on episode 3, and there's really quite fleshed out. I'm surprised because you keep asking me these questions, and I keep thinking of like a short way to summarize it because it keeps reminding me of how fleshed out so many of these plot threads are. I have to explain like 10 things to explain one thing, which
What is
actually makes me happy because it means that I've made so much great progress. So
what's
they I could
preventing you from actually writing the screenplay?
it's really just the time commitment. It's taken me so much time just to write these treatments that I've thought about. I actually in one of a few of the posts I put at the bottom, I said, I'm thinking about starting a Patreon. If I could get paid to do this or had some money to do this, then yeah, I could actually spend the time finishing these screenplays. But at this point, I'm really interested in polishing the treatments. There's some room for improvement. I need to spend some time just polishing those, and that way it's not like I mean, it can take months to really polish a screenplay, whereas these treatments, it doesn't take nearly as much time, and I would really like to see I would love it if I could get more attention so that I could get some artists to contribute concept art and
Are you an
storyboards.
artist yourself? Can you
No,
draw? No.
no, I really pretty I can do certain things. I can do pixel art, but that's about it. When I
Pixel
was a
art would
kid, I
work.
kind of sketched a bit.
You
Um,
don't even need like this to be detailed, Rembrandts. You could just go right into pixel art, dictate
Yeah,
what you're trying
if I
to do.
wanted to do some really rough sketches for storyboards, I could do that. I'm not really that interested at this point. Maybe if I really wanted a few key moments storyboarded out, but I'm not that excited about it right now. I have been gathering concept art. If people do find my subreddit, I've posted some of the existing concept art that I've found just from all the various Star Wars projects, mostly video games, and there's so much great stuff that matches what I have is either exactly like it's a location that I want to use or very closely the concept of what I'm trying to evoke. Especially there's a lot of cyborg Darth Maul art out there, and in my episode 2 there's a big sequence under in these Coruscant underworld, and there's quite a bit of good concept art showing exactly what that should look like.
It's interesting. I definitely hear what you're doing is this world building in terms of the Star Wars universe.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to actually get some actual story down. That would be wonderful. I mean, talk about audience development. If you're not writing the story, they have really nothing to follow except an idea.
Well, you should definitely. I think you would really like the treatments that I wrote because it's all there.
Do you have plans on posting them again to Reddit?
They're already there. They're in my subreddit.
Oh, okay. And what's the subreddit called?
It's r/prequels se.
Okay. I've been there before. Yeah, it's a good start, man. And your plan is to continue to hash this out, work on your
Uh,
treatments, get them to look as nice and organized as you possibly can, and then eventually put a screenplay together, or when.
Yeah, either a screenplay or some novella type. I'm not sure how. I don't know what length it would be. Would it be more of a novella or more of a novel? I'm not sure.
Depends. I mean, you won't know until you put word one on the top of a document, you know what I mean? You start writing
Yeah.
it.
Well, it would definitely be like a 120, roughly 120 page screenplay, and I don't know what that would translate to as a
Well, in
novel
terms
or a
of like
novella.
working out details, things can get their own life. I mean, they can just basically spin out of control.
Oh, I
And
see what
that's
you mean.
why,
Yeah.
it's very interesting because you don't know what this is until you put the words down.
Mhm.
The outline's great. I mean, I think, did we talk about the snowflake method last time
Yes,
we
we did.
spoke?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically you have your whole idea, and I think when you get organized to get motivated to start putting that story down, it's just gonna start flowing out of you. And eventually, you're not going to want to
Yeah,
give
that's
George
true.
Lucas
That
credit for this. I mean, you're going to be, well, why give him anything? Because what you're writing here is a totally different story. It doesn't even have to be Jedi. I mean, make up a new thing. Your story is better than his story. I mean, I just don't know. I was thinking about this on my way home the other day. How would you even make this thing into a thing? You know what I mean? There's no way they're going to delete 3 movies and say, hey, you in Chicago, come do this thing with us. You know what I mean?
yes.
That's the heartbreaking thing is all the effort that.
I'm glad you actually brought that up because I don't know if we mentioned. I think we might have mentioned there's a fan project called the Star Wars Prequels Revisited, which is basically one guy with a kind of a support network on the internet, but basically one guy redoing all the effects in the original trilogy, and it's incredible, and it's higher quality effects work than in the original Star Wars special editions, and which is just mind blowing to think that one guy can do better effect shots than ILM with
Yeah.
$1 million budget. And so that projects like that really encourage me. Like, no, George or Kathleen Kennedy is not going to call me and say, let's do this. But this could turn into a fan project with some legs if I could get some more attention to it. It could be animated. It could be a graphic novel. It could be illustrated screenplays. It could be an illustrated novel. Whatever gets the most traction, I'm open to. Uh, I was going to say if I can get fans excited, but actually the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. Most
People hate those
fans that see
movies.
this,
Anybody who wants to rewrite them, they're like gods in the whole community or whatnot.
yeah, most people who see this have gotten really excited about it. So I think at this point, I just need to get more people to see it, and I think that the fans will push it in the proper direction. There's some really incredible fan films that have been made,
Yeah,
and I kind of like the idea of, hey, we don't need hundreds of millions of dollars to do fancy CGI background shots of Coruscant. They already made those. What we do need is,
story,
just dialogue,
characters.
acting.
Yeah,
If we could get some really good actors to just film in front of either a black backdrop or a blue screen or something, and just I could easily dramatize a few of these key scenes.
I feel like
And
that's what George Lucas said. If we just get some really good actors to film in front of this green screen, I'll do the rest of the work.
yeah, yeah.
um,
I'm just saying that there's so many options for
yeah,
where this fan project could go. But as far as like you said, the Kathleen Kennedy actually saying, let's make these, that's definitely pie in the sky and far off. But I actually would like to be a filmmaker someday. And I've worked on at least one professional studio, well, potentially studio film, if it goes anywhere. So you never know if you never know where these things could go. I'm definitely got a totally open mind as to where it could go from here.
I would challenge you to write a short story about Anakin Skywalker and see how that fits.
How many page counts do you think you're
That
talking?
doesn't. I mean, if you write 120,000 words, it's a novel, but a short story can be anywhere from 500 words to 8,000.
All right, well, go read my treatments. I got you beat on the word count.
No, like an actual plot-driven story.
It's all there, dude. Check it out.
It's
You'd
a
love it.
story. It's like I
It
could
is.
read it.
Yeah.
It's not a treatment. Let me see.
Well, it is a treatment.
It's a treatment. I'm
It's
talking about a short story, like a
but
literary piece of writing.
it's not an outline. It is a readable. It's kind of like a short story with the dialogue cut out. It is a hybrid. I will give you that. But yeah, I could totally add dialogue scenes, and it would be like a short
You
story.
don't need dialogue. I'm trying to find this subreddit. There it
I
is.
would actually love it if you could give me feedback on how you think it reads, the treatment reads, if you feel like it works as a story, or if you feel like it needs dialogue or whatever, what have you. I would love to hear what you think.
All right, I'm looking at the thing right now. I love the art. Where'd this art come from?
I've just been collecting everything I could find on the internet that fits the concept.
Is this the Moon Temple? Act 2? Alderaan? Oh no, it's Alderaan. We've never seen Alderaan, have we?
Actually, you do see it in Revenge of the Sith, and I've
Oh really?
did link to that screenshot is a frame from Revenge of the Sith, and I think it looks great in Revenge of the Sith. It's one of the few things that they got absolutely right.
Wait. You linked to it? Am I looking at it? Is it like a sunset, mountains, some towers, some ships kind of flying, or are those not ships? I don't know what those are.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, that's a screenshot. It looks like art.
I'm not sure.
Man, this is so. I mean, you could really break this down into beats really easily. A space battle rages. Maul and his old, decrepit master, Darth Sidious, break into a secret deep space fortress and steal the old Republic's reserve of kyber crystals. I mean, there you go. That's a short story right there. You know what I mean? That's a story. That's a moment, and you write 8,000 words about it. It's fascinating, man. It's very interesting. I know a woman. Her name is Lauren Garcia. I had her on the podcast a few months ago, and she got her start doing Star Wars fan fiction. She had a huge following on. God, I can't remember the name of the website, but from there she actually wrote her own trilogy with unique characters and whatnot, and she's published. I mean, she's got a nice little following and making a living being an author.
Yeah, I mean, I have quite a few ideas for original material that I would love. I've an idea that I would love to make into a graphic novel, and I've actually a few other big ideas that I'd love to either make as films or possibly as a novel.
And did we talk about that one subreddit, the collab?
Oh yeah, you mentioned it. Was not able to find it.
Oh, let me see if I can find it for you. Mention about what you've developed so far that you want people to know.
The if I could have one request, it would be to send people to the subreddit prequels SE, and to please share it with everyone you like, everyone you know who hated the prequels or are Star Wars fans, or anybody who's open to anyone who's not a prequels apologist. Although there have been some conversions, so you never know. Just please share it around, and if especially with artists, anyone who uh, makes anything even kind of like concept art, I would love it if I could get some art for the project. That would really be that's the next step.
What are some things that a prequel apologist would say? I've actually never heard the term.
Oh well, I guess I'm just kind of making that term up, but it would be like 90s kids who grew up with the Clone Wars cartoon and just they love the prequels and they're unapologetic about it pretty much.
But aren't the Clone Wars cartoons actually good? That's what I keep hearing.
uh
Tried to watch them. I mean, I think we even talked about how the clones are better because they actually have personality.
well, they're better than the prequels, but from what I've seen them, I've seen a lot of it, not the whole thing. A lot of it is a exercise in turd polishing. And from my perspective of
I love the
trying,
term turd polishing. Every time you say it, it's picture this rag like basically smushing poo into the ground.
yeah, well, we can't polish a turd, so
Yeah.
it's certainly trying to salvage the prequels. But from my rewrite perspective of
Okay.
I've questioned everything and worked really hard to like what would I try to imagine what if these movies were great, and from my perspective, the Clone Wars cartoon just is not. It's so mediocre. It's not good. But I understand why people kind of fell in love with it. Any long running series, you kind of
I
grow to
shot you a link. It's a comic book collabs. Comic book collabs. That's the Reddit that I was talking about. Do you remember? You probably don't remember because I think you're maybe 5 or 6 years younger than me, maybe younger than that. During the '80s, there used to be a cartoon about C3PO and R2D2.
Yeah,
They did an
droids. Yeah,
droids. That was horrible.
there was also an Ewoks cartoon. Yeah,
That was an Ewoks cartoon. There are also two little movies that came out
right. Yeah.
that featured Ewoks, and I mean, I loved them when I was a kid. I thought they were the best. I was a
Oh
total
yeah.
Star Wars lover.
I so wish I had seen those when I was a kid.
They're out there, man. They exist.
I've seen they're on YouTube, and I've seen little
Yeah,
bits of them.
yeah, they're
And
horrible.
I tried watching. I tried watching one of them. I just, oh man, what I wouldn't give to be able to go back, because I know if I was a kid, I would have loved to, because you get to see more of the world, and it's awesome.
Yeah, that's what's so good about the Star Wars. I mean, what do people say about the prequels? That it's just the world. They're okay. And I think we even mentioned this thing as well last time we
Yeah.
talked about letting them wash over you. You're not trying to dig too deep because, man, I have a metaphor for writing that involves, a lump of shit. Basically, everything that you write is shit. It's absolute crap. I mean, you're
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
just taking the crap and molding it into whatever you
Absolutely.
want it to be. In this
Yes.
case, we're going to use a Buddha. You shape it into a Buddha and you let it dry and you hand it to somebody and you're like, here's a Buddha. They said, no, dude, it's just shit shaped
Hmm.
into a Buddha. So you take it back, right? And you paint it. You paint it gold and you make it all pretty and you hand it to somebody else. And you're like, hey, here's my Buddha. And they don't know that it's a lump of shit shaped into a Buddha painted gold. They're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And they'll put it on their mantelpiece. But
Yes.
it's just shit. You know what I mean? It's just shit.
It started that way. Yeah, I totally agree. Before I started this, I would not have been able to kind of wrap my head around how do you rewrite three movies. It's an epic saga, doing it all at once. It's only in hindsight have I noticed that. Oh, right, I just started small and simple, just simple notes, just ideas that got me excited, and I just kept writing them down and just kept collecting notes over and over and over again until finally I had uh, a structure and then an outline and then drafts, and it just you just start small and look at the big picture and just build and build and build. Even if you're just doing research, it helps. It all helps. Just
Well,
little
this is what I
steps.
want to do 100%. Once you actually have some stuff written down and I think you have a community out there that would love to see more stories from you, or for that matter,
Hmm.
stories from you. This is just the beginning. I can't wait to talk to you and figure out exactly what direction this project's going in. Um,
Yeah, if I get somewhere, I'd love to talk to you again.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, just start writing, bro. Just put words down. There's something going on in
I
your
actually
head that I would love to see
a
develop into
moment
an
because
actual thing.
I wrote so much the first 3 weeks of the month to get those drafts out. So maybe next year I'll start writing again.
Next
Actually,
year,
I got to
tomorrow,
finish. I
tomorrow.
got to yeah, in 2 days tomorrow. It's a good one. Tomorrow I got to start working on episode 3. I've got a
How
lot of
close?
ideas.
Do you know where you're going, or
Actually, there's a great guy on Reddit that I've never met him, but he's been very great at as like a sounding board talking to him. And
interesting?
I sent a DM to him. We were talking about episode 3, and I said, I thought it would be the easiest to rewrite because I thought I had enough notes, but I didn't have enough notes. I thought it'd be the easiest to write because I would require the least amount of changes because it's the best film of the prequels. And then I realized, well, because I said earlier how was rewatching the film, I was looking for like, okay, exactly how is this movie put together, and I realized that if I don't have Yoda, I don't have General Grievous, I don't have Utapau, I don't have oh, there was some other big element. If you take all of that out, there's not much left. So I realized that I did not have enough to fill in episode 3. So, but I've since thought about what I could do, and there's actually some continuity issues with Rogue One that I'm trying to work out because I would like it to fit Rogue One.
Well, you have to make it fit, right?
Yeah,
And
well,
is Rogue One
his
perfect?
argument
No,
was to just
but I mean,
ignore Rogue One, and I
it,
wanted to fit Rogue One because it's very close. I just had to figure it out.
do you like Rogue One?
I love Rogue One. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's not a bad movie. I mean, it's got problems, but all of them
Yeah.
have problems.
Yeah,
Again, let it wash over you.
people have been too rough on Rogue One. There's character arcs. It's just more subtle. The characters are just not over the top the way they are in, like, say, The Force Awakens. And it's okay. So I agree that's a flaw, kind of a flaw in the movie. They're not the most charismatic characters, but it's not that bad. Have you seen Episode 2? Come on, people. This
No,
is like
episode two was actually not. I saw episode two more than I saw episode one. I didn't mind it as much, but I hate Jar Jar, and Jar Jar wasn't in number two, so I'm
uh,
okay with it. You know what I mean? I hate that the owner of the diner or whatever the hell that is.
yeah.
I think I'm allergic to computer animation. Honestly, put it in a movie, I'm gonna throw up on you.
Yeah, well, there's tons of bad CG in the prequels, and Episode 2 is by far, I think, the worst Star Wars movie of all
Oh my
time.
god, it has that whole C3PO and R2D2 and the factory part,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, and it just gets
Oh,
worse from there the more you remember
oh
how
yeah,
bad that movie is.
and then you have
It has a
the
romance.
blaster in her
It has
hand,
an
and
it has a romantic
oh
A
god, don't
plot
talk about it.
that
The
doesn't
sand
work,
scene.
and then the
Oh
B
god.
plot is a mystery that doesn't resolve. So the
Ugh.
movie doesn't work at all, and it has a kid Boba Fett. I mean, the movie's a garbage mess.
Well, I don't mind that part. I don't think. I don't mind the part with Obi-Wan Kenobi on whatever that is with the clones. I like that, I think. But man, I
Yeah,
hated
yeah.
everything
Obi-Wan
else.
is the good part.
That
Obi-Wan's okay.
opening scene with Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan chasing after the assassin, that wasn't bad.
It could have been a lot better. Read my rewrite. I think you'd like that a lot better.
I wanted to ask also, what would you say to people going on to your subreddit and pulling parts of your story out and writing fiction for you? What would you be upset by that?
I wouldn't be upset. I would be like cautious. I would be kind of on edge about it, like not sure. I hope this is. I hope there's no downside to this. I actually kind of like the idea of having a community that's all excited. If they're excited about it, then that makes me excited. But I don't want them to kind of ruin the version that I'm trying to create. So I think I would probably just say, certain rewrites are accepted, but if you want to try and jam Jar Jar into my rewrite, please
Oh
start your own
no, I'm not
subreddit.
saying that, but that's interesting that you would say that you're very protective over it because you
Not
put it
that,
out there for the
yeah,
world
not.
to enjoy, and it's not really even complete at this point. It's still
Well, I
just a
wouldn't say
project.
protective because I have to acknowledge that it's Star Wars. It's not mine. It's George Lucas's, and
Yeah.
I'm playing in somebody else's universe. I'm only protective in the sense that I'd like to at least get mine right. I mean, there's a million Star Wars rewrites out there. I'm sure there's a million prequel rewrites out there. So I just don't want to people to confuse which versions which is the only real issue there. Is I'm still trying to nail mine properly.
Do you remember Jar Jar or Darth Jar Jar?
Yes, the Darth Jar Jar theory. Yeah.
Do you think that would have made for a better movie?
Nope, because it's still Jar Jar Binks.
I want to see a Darth Jar Jar.
People love that theory, though. I think it's kind of dumb.
I want to rewrite your whole treatment with Darth Jar Jar instead of Darth
Because
Sidious.
yeah, if somebody wants to make a derivative project like that with like Jar
Derivative. How
Jar.
dare you, sir?
Well, it's all derivative of Star Wars,
That's true.
yeah, the Darth Jar Jar thing used to be one of the biggest. Oh, that reminds me. There's a subreddit actually called Fan Theories, and most of them are like the Darth Jar Jar thing, where it's like this person is secretly the villain, or this person is secretly the mastermind,
I don't
or
know.
this person was dead
I
the whole
wonder.
time.
I wonder. I wonder if that was George Lucas's intention. He never really actually acknowledged that. I don't think. Did he? I don't know.
I don't think so, but there's an idea that's similar that I like a lot better, and the idea that R2D2 has been a rebel spy the entire saga. I like that idea a lot better.
I also like the idea that it's R2D2 telling the story to the
The Ewoks.
would know the whims.
Oh,
The
the Journal of the Wills.
yes, thank you. And that's why he is in every single movie, and why he always comes out saving the day or whatnot at the end of the whatever's. But I think that's now been kind of debunked because he's not really saving the day anymore in the movies that are being produced.
Who? 3PO?
R2D2.
Oh, R2D2. Oh, huh. Yeah, he does. He does save the day a lot in the original trilogy, and I
Yeah.
guess a bit in.
He's kind of the hero and everything.
Yeah, but I guess not in the new one. Yeah, in the new ones,
Not
he's
in the new
really
ones.
relegated. In the Force Awakens, they don't have much respect for R2 in the Force Awakens, and in the
Nope.
new one, in Last Jedi,
He's barely in it. Also,
yeah, I don't even remember what he did outside of that one scene where he brings back
he
Leia.
acknowledges them. Yeah. What brings back Leia? Does he bring back Leia?
Well, he brings up back the old message, the old Leia
Oh yeah,
plea.
yeah. That's the part. And then Luke acknowledges them in a
Yeah,
scene.
and then I don't remember what else he even does in the rest of the movie.
How do you feel about the Last Jedi?
I'm mad that I haven't seen it again yet. I've only seen it the one time, and everyone in my family is sick, so we didn't go see it again.
Did you like
But
it on your first
I
viewing?
on my first viewing, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, me
Loved
too.
it, loved it, loved it. And I'm frustrated with all the mixed reaction that it's been getting.
Yeah.
It's it's rough. I almost want to kind of just I want to read it all, and yet I don't want to read any of it because it's
It seems to be
kind of painful.
racist. A lot of the stuff I've been reading is like, oh, there are no white people on the rebels, and the white guys are all the bad guys, and
Oh
they've
wow,
ruined Luke.
I
They've
haven't seen
ruined
that,
him.
but that sounds more like the trolls that are.
Yeah. Well, they're all trolls, aren't they? I just don't get it.
I don't know. I was right after I saw the movie. I was on IMDb, and every single review was negative, like very negative, not just like a little bit negative. And I find it particularly frustrating because Ryan Johnson is one of my favorite filmmakers, and just the idea of I've been excited since I heard that one of my favorite directors is going to make Star Wars my favorite franchise with one of my favorite directors just blew my mind, and it was as good as I was hoping, maybe better, probably better than what I was hoping. And he wrote it exactly the way you're supposed to write a screenplay, which is all the characters have arcs, everything has a purpose, it's all cohesive, it all works, it's epic, it's all this new material, it advances the story, and all surprises. He never did the obvious answer to any of the questions. He always went for the most surprising option, which to me I think is how you should write a sequel to anything, pretty much. And I loved the movie, and the hate that it's getting, just it's real rough because it's really ultimately, I think, the anti Force Awakens, because the Force Awakens was all about fan service and pandering, and I think the Last Jedi does the opposite of that. I think it doesn't pander at all, and everything's about advancing the universe and advancing the characters, and I loved it.
Yeah, I did too. And I loved Looper.
Yeah, me
I
too.
think that's the only movie I've actually seen of his is
He
Looper.
also did a movie called Brick, which is a little independent film that I also would highly recommend. It's a very it's like Dashiell Hammett novel. It's like a Sam Spade.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I like that.
Yes, except set in a high school. It's very clever the way he plays with the genre and the tropes.
Okay, I'll check it out.
It's a great little independent.
I thought he did the Book of somebody too, or is that the guy who's doing?
That's somebody else.
Who is that? Okay, maybe that's the guy who did the Rogue One.
The Rogue One guy is the guy who directed Godzilla.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not like God. Oh, maybe I didn't watch Godzilla.
I saw part of it. I didn't really dig it. Although I liked Kong a lot. Skull Island I thought was good.
Oh, you thought that was good? I tried to watch that one too and couldn't get into it.
Yeah, it's not a good script, but he really directed the heck out of it. I was impressed by the directing.
Are you excited about May 25th with Han?
We haven't even seen a trailer yet, so
Seen
I don't.
anything? Anytime there's been like an article about Han, this Solo actually is what it's called. It is
Yes.
a picture of Harrison Ford. Like,
That's weird because there's been a couple pictures of the guy. I think his name's
or whatever his name is.
Aaron Elrich or something like that. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but I'm very open to what it could be. I think that's kind of why I loved The Last Jedi. I was very open to any possibilities. I wanted to be surprised, and there was lots of surprises in that movie. So I'm really hoping that I will enjoy the Solo.
The only movie that disappointed me really was The Force Awakens, and that was
me too.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't like that movie is honestly the way they introduced Harrison Ford or Han Solo. I just hated that.
Oh, you didn't like that
animated monster thing? I think we talked about that last time.
Right,
like
yes,
that stuff.
yeah. Why is the Wrath? What are they called? Rathtars? I think they're called Rathtars. Why is that so divisive? Is it just because they're clearly CG?
It just didn't really help or move the story forward at all.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
it didn't really do anything. I mean, it was like,
right.
Oh, hey, we're gonna take a break in the action here, and we're gonna throw in this throwaway.
It's just there because it's just there because every Star Wars movie needs a monster. That's why it's there.
That's necessary. I mean, the Rancor had a point. I mean, they built it up. There was something down there. They got rid of the slave girl. You know, oh, Luke is standing on the same thing. Oh no, he's down there with the monster, and now he has to kill it.
Yeah. Well, what bothered me about Force Awakens was that it was.
It's like, oh, dude, now, we didn't get it built up. They're horribly animated, and then they use it to get away from the pirates or whatever they were, the people who Han Solo owed money to.
Yes.
Just like, oh, come on, man. This is just bad. Just bad.
Yeah,
I don't like J.J. Abrams, though. I don't like that dude at all.
I like him, but I don't. Yeah, I actually agree with that. I actually think he did kind of ruin. He changed Star Trek into Star Wars, and I always thought, hey, there already
I don't know
is a
about
Star
that.
Wars.
He changed Star Trek into crap. That's what he did. He changed it into crap. Maybe Quentin Tarantino will be able to turn that around, and we'll have.
Oh, I really hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
Are you a big science fiction reader, or are you just a big science fiction movie person?
I'm really, yes, I'm a big science fiction movie person, and a little bit TV. I don't watch a lot of TV these days, and I aspire to be a bigger sci-fi reader. I've got a big shelf full of books that I got a big backlog. I've been meaning to read, like, for example, the Culture series. I gotta read that. It's just I've heard so much about it and how great it is.
I've never heard the word culture series before.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
it's a big sci-fi
I'm gonna look it up
phenomenon,
right
I
now.
guess.
If I look up culture series, you think it'll pop up?
Ian M. Banks is the author, and it's
Yep,
called
there it is.
The Culture series, and it's
It's
the
huge.
the most hyped
1987,
the most hyped sci-fi series that I've
written
heard
by a
of.
Scottish dude.
Yeah,
Huh.
and I'm big fans of like Dune, and I like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, all the big famous sci-fi novels. I've read a bunch of them. Not as many as I would like. I should read more.
Well, are you have you checked out Orville?
Oh, not yet. I've
That's really
talked
good.
to my friends about it. Yeah, that's what
Not
they
the Star
say
Trek though,
is that
either.
they say the real Star Trek fans are not watching the new show; they're watching the Orville.
Yeah, I and the Orville's really good. And I tried to watch Star Trek, and I got to maybe the third episode and was interrupted and did not go back to watching it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that new Star Trek show. To
Have
me,
you watched any of it, or are you just guessing that you're
no.
not going to like it?
I'm guessing I'm not going to like it based on the trailer, which reminded me of a lot of the things that I don't like about the new J.J. Abrams Star Trek.
I don't
Um,
like the Klingons. They drive me crazy. I don't know why. They're not good. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I do know why. They're just not good.
well, they definitely a bit different. That doesn't bother me so much as it. I mean, it reminds me of the JJ stuff, JJ Abrams universe, the Kelvin timeline, as they call it.
The Kelvin, is that where the Kelvin was the first ship that blew up?
Yeah, that was the USS Kelvin
Killing
is this
what's his
beginning of
face's dad,
yes,
Kirk, not
Kirk's
not
dad
Kirk.
played by
Actually,
Thor.
I call him Fake
Yeah,
Kirk.
to me, if I was in control of the franchise of the Star Trek franchise, I would give it to somebody like Christopher Nolan, who, with movies like Inception and Interstellar, I would want him to produce the next Star Trek movie and make it cerebral and don't make it like Star Wars. We already have a Star Wars franchise going and it's going great. Don't try to do that. To be
I
something
think
different.
back in the
And
day when we had the original series people on the movies, man, they were good. Even the bad ones are good. Yeah, and then you know what it was? I think the Enterprise was more up in your face. Lingering shots of being on the Enterprise.
yeah, yeah.
And now they just blow up the Enterprise. Every single movie, they just destroy it. It's like, oh, we blew up the Enterprise, guys. Are you excited? No.
Yeah, I agree. If it's turned into Star Wars where it's just about the action, and Star Trek was never really an action series, it was a thoughtful, it's always been a thoughtful sci-fi series, and movies like Inception make me think, hey, they've proven that there's an audience for a big budget,
Are you talking about Interstellar?
high concept sci-fi type movie. If they would just invest in that, they could
Do you mean
distinguish themselves from Star Wars.
do you mean Interstellar? Inception was the dream one.
Well, both
Yeah.
I think are great examples of high
Both of them are great
concept.
movies. I'm not gonna lie. I love both of them. I
Yeah,
love Christopher Nolan. I think he did a great job with the
yeah.
Batman series too.
I think they're both examples of heady sci-fi that were mainstream hits.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to make Fast and the Furious in space.
It's a great time to be a sci-fi fan in terms of cinema.
I agree.
People love it. I mean, our generation is paying big money for it.
Yes, I agree. I can't keep up. There's a TV show called The Expanse, which I've heard is great, and I haven't watched that either.
Watched a few of the episodes. It's really good. The part that they're in space or they're on Mars, and the part that they're on the Earth just wasn't good for me. The book is supposed to be really good, though. The series is supposed to be really good.
Oh yeah, I forgot that it's based on a book.
Yeah, totally. So man, it's an hour and 30 minutes in. This has been a great conversation, and we'll definitely do it again. I'd like to see, develop the third act of your story and
Uh-huh.
and see where that goes. And man, the
I would love to
community.
hear your reactions to the treatments.
Yeah, I try to look at it and make comments. Um,
I
do me a
definitely
favor.
want to know if you think it works as a story, because it's supposed to be a pretty readable story. I hope it works, and it should feel like a movie.
Well, I mean, a screenplay is going to feel more like a movie than a treatment, right? I mean, what I'm reading so far is I think it really could be fleshed out. I would
Oh
love to
yeah,
see it
yeah,
fleshed out
yeah. It's
in
definitely
terms of either the action,
yeah.
which is going to pull the reader through because it's a screenplay, great, or in terms of an immersive story where you could just let it, the words wash
Yeah,
over
I
you again.
agree. I hope it works because you've seen the existing films and you know what a Star Wars film looks like. So
But I will
hopefully the
say
fact
this,
that it's not fleshed out hopefully works.
excuse me. The thing I read was very engaging, and that's why we're talking on this podcast now. Because what you wrote already, that small snippet that I saw on Sci-Fi Writers, was incredibly engaging, and I think people love this world that you want to work in. And there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with developing projects in it. And I do believe that,
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happmes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting to see because
Well,
I
you
mean,
say that people love this world, and I mean that just reminds me of why I did it in the first place. Is
yeah.
I'm often reminded of how I don't care about Star Wars if the quality goes down,
Mhm.
and movies like The Last Jedi to me salvage it because it's so great, and Rogue One too. Rogue One had so many great moments that really reminded me, oh yeah, I do love this universe, and I still feel strongly I want to fix the prequels. I want to see what, and in my head I want to imagine what would they be if they were to the quality standards that Star Wars has set with nearly every other entry in the saga.
You sounds like you don't like the Force Awakens either. Would you want to fix that one or just get rid of that whole Raptor thing?
um That's a whole podcast right there. I basically, I don't know if you can fix it. I mean, I think I'm more open to the it's going forward in the story, and I think it was kind of fixed by The Last Jedi. It fixed enough that, I mean, The Force Awakens is not a bad movie. I think it's a good movie. It's very well directed. I kind of
I
like
love
JJ.
Ray. I think it's a great character, and the
I
actress who
like
plays her is beautiful.
Abrams as a director. I don't like him as a screenwriter.
Yeah, I don't like him,
And to me,
period.
The Force Awakens doesn't work because it's a remake of A New Hope, and I want to see something new. And The Last Jedi was something new, and I loved it. And Rey, I can't say that I do not like Rey in The Force Awakens. She is to me, I think she is clearly a Mary Sue character. And she was salvaged in The Force Awakens. I think she became a real character in in The Last Jedi.
Huh. No, I really enjoyed her. Just I think I like the actress. I think she's very charismatic.
I like her
Um,
too, and I think you see how great she is in The Last Jedi.
do not
Everyone,
like
I thought everyone
what's
was
his
great.
name? Darth.
Adam Driver,
Yeah, he drives me
yeah, he's
crazy.
great too. I thought everyone was great in Last Jedi.
He's a
I
great
really
actor,
enjoyed.
but I don't know. Maybe his girl's character really just shadows me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just don't know. He seems very, I don't know, odd. Like he would smell bad in real life.
He's definitely a unique person, but I like that. I like that he's different. That's kind of what I like about these new movies is that if as long as they're going forward and trying, well, I shouldn't say trying new things because they could experiment in the wrong way, but going forward, I'm much more open to trying new things. Whereas to me, the prequels, you have to match what came before, otherwise it
Mhm.
breaks it.
No,
So
you
that
have
to
to
me
match
is
what
the
comes
difference.
forward. You have to match what we already know. As the story, chapter one, you're writing like the negative numbers. Um, and then what's his name? The guy who directed The Force Awakens. He's got a whole trilogy to develop that's not even in the Skywalker saga.
Yeah, the Ryan
Incredibly upset.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to talk to him if I would love to show him my drafts, and I would love to talk about our different approaches to how
What
we
you got
write
to
Star
do, my
Wars.
friend, is just get rid of all the Skywalker crap and make all new characters, and your world could be actually what he develops if you're, on top of things. Who knows? I mean,
I,
the Star Wars world is
I
still
would
developing
I
right
would
now.
love to sit in a writer's room with him and talk Star Wars and come up with something new. I would love that. That would be amazing. That'd be a dream come true.
You're doing it. You just got to stop calling it a prequel and call it something else, right? I mean,
Well, if I was working with him, I would talk about my drafts as far as like what is Star Wars and how does it work as a story. But like I would just throw it out and write something new, which is what he's doing. He's starting
yeah.
from scratch.
Are you educating yourself on how to format a screenplay? Or did you tell me
Oh,
that you've already written screenplays before?
I've written unfinished screenplays before, so yeah, I'm familiar with all that stuff.
Cool. Do you want to mention anything else before we sum it up?
No, just please check out my drafts on my subreddit, and please send it to artists and Star Wars fans, and please, hopefully, it will get some traction. I would love to get some art created for it.
So let's sum this up, man. In
Yeah,
terms of what you've done, I ask a question at the end of the podcast. Basically, 3 questions. The first one is, what would you say to somebody who would come to you and say, I'd like to do something like this? I mean, what would be the advice that you would give them?
Well, I guess I would immediately ask them like, are you talking about fan fiction or are you talking about writing anything original? I guess immediately I think of, follow your passion.
Follow your passion.
Just throw out everything else. Just there's a saying that I've heard people, smarter and wiser people than me have said something like, think about the thing that you are most passionate about in life, whether that's a business idea or a creative outlet. And then ask yourself, why aren't you working on that right now? Why aren't you fully invested in that right now? And there's almost certainly no good reason why you wouldn't be. And to me, that's really been hammered home by the fact that last year I was just like frustrated and kind of lost, and creatively lost. And I kind of threw myself into 2 fan projects that, and this was one of them, that this is what I was most passionate about. And I just kind of found myself working on these just, I don't know, just to entertain myself, I guess, to just to get out of this rut that I was in. And I posted, primitive versions of those on Reddit, and they just exploded. And so I think the best advice I can give you is just work on something that you are just most passionate about. Follow your bliss, follow your
Follow
dream.
through, right? I mean, that's what I'm getting more than anything else is follow through. If you have an idea, start it out on paper and start working it and working it and working it.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
that's basically what you did. I mean, you had an idea. The prequel sucked. You could have left it at that. You could have just walked away from the idea that the prequels were horrible and they were a tragedy and,
Mhm.
they were, like we said.
Yeah, and I encounter that perspective a lot from people who are just like, well, just let it go. Who cares? And those are
But you
clearly
didn't.
people.
You put a sentence down on paper and then another one and another one. You followed through with it. Now the idea is, I don't even know. How many words have you developed into this project so far?
Just word count.
Yeah.
In terms of word count, I can actually give you an exact number of the current draft. I think it's somewhere around 80,000 words.
Wow.
Let me do a word
And we're
count right
talking
now.
about 3 long works here. So like 30,000 a piece
No,
almost, or
sorry.
25,000.
Okay, my document says 8,156 words, 46,000 characters. My current
So
draft.
8,000 words so far in this.
That's
That's
really,
basically
yeah.
a novelette. And you only have one movie fleshed out?
Wait a minute. Is this document the full thing? Hold on, let me check. It seems way too short.
How many pages is it?
Oh, wait, actually, you know what? I was gonna say that sounded way too small. Yeah, this is not the right document. This one is only 46. That's 8,000. I know my current draft is way longer than that. Hold on 1 second. I'm actually curious to figure out right now what exactly word count I'm up to. Because it really ballooned recently. Yeah, I can see right already. This is a way longer draft. Okay, the current draft is 13,000 words, and I haven't written episode 3 yet.
That's what I'm saying, man. This is a really interesting project that you've developed for yourself, and I'm happy that I discovered it. And I'm also very happy that you decided to talk to me today. My second question
Okay.
is, what are you reading at the moment that's inspiring you to continue this project? Or I don't know,
Oh,
what's on your Kindle? What's on your night table?
it's a good question. I wish I had a great answer. Um, I've been reading a lot of old Star Wars graphic novels that are on my
Oh,
shelf,
okay.
um, as inspiration. But as far as like research material, I can definitely recommend research materials. There's so much great Joseph Campbell stuff out there, and people have been inspired by Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and the
Yeah.
monomyth. Um, there's YouTube channels that I can recommend. I mentioned that one. I think it's called Just Right. That's maybe the best writing YouTube channel. That's all video essays about writing and creativity, mostly movie focused. But I think that the story principles are universal to any story.
I agree.
And so that's great stuff. And while I was writing this, I think maybe the best thing that I encountered is in working on screenplays. Have you talked to anybody who writes screenplays, or is it all like
I've written
novels?
screenplays.
Okay, so in terms of screenplays, one of the best pieces of advice to me is I think you will inevitably encounter these things called beat sheets. Have you heard of these?
Well, that's the moments, right?
Yeah, or sometimes
The
called
breakdown of
moments.
the action.
What they really are templates. And if you ever wondered why so many movies feel like they were written to a template or a formula, if they feel too formulaic, it's probably because they actually were. There are these beat sheet templates that float around Hollywood, and so many scripts are written to this structure. And once you recognize it, it just feels so stale. And the best advice I can give you if you're interested in movie story structure is research Dan Harmon's story circle, where he's taken the hero's journey and the monomyth structure, and he's gotten away from these beat sheets, which are too specific and will produce a formulaic piece of writing. Whereas if you throw that out, you might end up with just you have no story structure, so you have no guidance. And he found this perfect sweet spot. I think I would call it this perfect sweet spot of just enough structure. It's just specific enough to be useful, but it's super generic. It's incredibly generic, and I don't think it will produce uh, stale stories. And
Dan
he
Harmon is the guy who developed Community and
and the
Rick and Morty,
co-creator
right?
of Rick and Morty, yes, and people know Rick and Morty now, so everyone knows that now. And every episode of Community and Rick and Morty are written to his story circle structure.
Loved Community. I thought that was a great show. I thought it was
And,
interestingly written. And Rick and Morty, man, I just recently discovered it and binged like all 3 seasons.
yes,
Really
if
good.
you want to talk about creative writing, I think Rick and Morty is an excellent source. And the starting point, I would say, is Dan Harmon's story circles. Uh,
Okay, that's awesome.
and
I even his podcast is incredibly interesting as well.
yes,
Vulgar, vulgar, but man, it's really fascinating.
yes, there's a lot of stuff there, especially that's another thing that I've gotten into recently is I was never really into D&D and didn't really
Oh
know much
man,
about it. But once you get into creative writing, you realize that D&D is really shockingly connected to creative writing.
I love
Uh,
D&D. I love role playing games. Yeah.
yeah, so much to learn from D&D and role-playing games
Are
that
you actually throwing the dice now, or are you just interested in getting started?
I don't have anyone to play with at the moment, but I've learned so much about it that it makes you want to play D&D just to kind of like flex your creative muscles. Is it's like training for writing if you
Yeah, it's really
it's
interesting.
oh, and it
And the
mixes in.
unfortunate thing is you have to deal with other people. So unless you're being a DM, you have to live in somebody else's ideas and story. And they
And it
do
mixes
not
in
like being flexed. You know, they don't want their story messed with. They want you to I don't know. I love D&D. I love role-playing games. I think they're really fascinating.
yeah,
Great. And
well,
you're right on target with in terms of writing too.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably like pull up some notes and like tell you all the best writing tips, but I don't feel like I mean, I'm kind of just starting out myself. Like one of the things I did when if there's a reason why this rewrite feels connects with people and they say that it's really good. I think a lot of that stems to the fact that I did my homework. This is not like I did not write this the way a fan would write a piece of fan fiction. It wasn't self-indulgent. I wanted to do it properly, and so I spent a lot of time researching story structure and proper writing and stuff that I was only vaguely familiar with. I was kind of sort of new Campbell and the hero's journey and the hero with thousand faces, but it really didn't crystallize in my mind until I was actually writing something myself, and then all that
And
stuff.
I'd always recommend too, if you want to write, you have to write. You have to throw words down on paper. I mean, always. That's the most pressing thing you do.
I
Right. I
agree.
mean, you can know all the rules, you can, have all the ideas in the world, but unless you're actualizing them on a document, it's just you don't understand that it goes beyond the mind. It's actual
Yes.
physical.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I realized while in the past couple of years from writing quite a bit is that I enjoy writing. I enjoy filling the page.
Yeah.
And apparently a lot of writers don't. Apparently they hate it and they feel like they have
They're
writer's
not
block.
really writers, are they?
Yeah, I have to tend to agree with the writers who say, well, if you hate writing, then I guess you're not really a writer, or
Yeah, find something else to do with your
maybe
life.
you weren't suited to be a writer. And I kind of feel that way when I'm writing, especially, God, what was I think it was I was stuck on the first draft of the episode one treatment,
Mhm.
and I was reluctant to finish it for some reason. I forget what I was stuck about or anything, but I was waiting for me to be in the mood to write, and how it's like, and you kind of never are.
Yeah.
And then
Big
I just
mistake there, right? You can't
yeah
wait for the mood to strike. You have to be on schedule every day
yeah
and hit those keys.
yeah. If you're making if it's your profession, if it's your income, then if it's your source of income, yeah, you
Or
have
if
to
you have
write
any
every
fantasies to make it your income, I mean, there's no way you're making any money by sitting on the couch watching TV going, I just don't feel like it today.
So I just sat down and started writing, and
Yeah.
it just flowed out of me, and that's
Yeah.
when I realized, yeah, I enjoy writing, and that definitely I can feel that. I feel like that sets me apart. I can't
That's
identify with
really
people
cool.
who hate the actual process of writing. And then the other piece of advice I would add to that is, if you're staring at a blank page and you don't know what to fill it with, I would say to
Words.
me, a big part of writing is writing down notes, story structure notes. And to me, not every story should be written, from knowing nothing and just exploring it. That's one way of writing, to just explore and see what happens. You can do that. But
That's me. That's what I do.
if you're really stuck, I think you need to decide what the ending is. You need to decide what is your story really
Oh
about.
yeah. It's really easy to have a point to aim for. Okay, I know where I'm going. I just need to
Yeah.
get there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really awesome.
Yeah, if you can decide what you want the ending to be, you can just write to that and you can just connect the dots. Or if you are starting from like, what is the central theme or moral or concept that I'm trying to
Exactly.
get at? And if you can't answer that question, that's why you have a blank page in front of you. So you need to answer. You either need to know what the answer is, and then once you write it, you can decide what the moral or the theme is, or you need to decide that up front and then write to an ending that plays into that or reinforces that.
Unfortunately, if you do what they call a writing by the seat of your pants, a pantser typewriter, get used to your delete key because you're going to end up deleting a lot of stuff.
I agree. The one of the things I've discovered while writing this is that I think I'm a real big believer in not necessarily outlining, but
Mhm.
at least notes
They
and
call that a
deciding.
gardener,
Sorry.
gardening. You plant things and you
Oh,
reap what
okay.
you sow at the end of the story. So
Yeah,
you'd be like a gardener writer.
I am a big believer in writing the actually there's a name to this. I forget what it's called, but I encountered a blog post that really codified this style of writing where
Mhm.
you write the short version, like, write the one sentence version of your story and then write the paragraph version
Oh,
and then
it's called oh dude, I just wrote
write
this
the one
down. It
page.
is called no, it's called the snowflake method.
Yes, that's it. The snowflake method. And that's something that I thought of myself. And I thought, I bet somebody else has thought of this, and of course, somebody else has thought of this. And am a big believer in knowing where you're going. There's a lot of writers who say that you should not know the ending, and I think that works for certain stories. If you're writing like a character drama, I think yeah, you can just explore and see where the story goes. But if you're writing something like Star Wars, I think it's anything mythological, action, adventure, that kind of stuff, hero's journey stuff. I think you really need to know what your ending is. I think you need to know where you're going.
Yeah, I
And I
agree.
think the best advice I can give you
It's
is,
easy that way. I mean, I'm not going to say that. Like I said, I just finished the novel and it had no ending until
yeah,
like long into the process, and I got to know my delete key. I deleted like 15,000 words out of it just because the
wow.
plot that I ended up writing was like
Yeah,
was
that's why I say I'm so into this idea of I think you should write a short version of it. You should write a few pages version of it, and you need to work. You can hammer that down. Dialogue can come later, character arcs can come later. You can flesh out the characters later. I think that you should know the story and the plot first. Otherwise, you are going to be spending your whole life
oh, I
rewriting.
can't wait, man. You're gonna write these. You're gonna end up writing novels of these stories
I
because you're gonna get
definitely
so
have.
frustrated with the world that you're building. So you know what? This is my novel, Bloom, and it's gonna be out.
Yeah, I shudder to think of all the people who have deleted novel size, just
Chunks.
yeah, what do you call it? Like hanging threads,
Yeah.
diversions, like novel size diversions that end up going nowhere. Like, did you ever see that movie, Wonder Boys with
Yes.
Michael Douglas? That
Hmm.
whole movie's about basically about writer's block and a writer who's just been filling pages for years because he didn't know what the ending was. He didn't know
Hmm.
what he was writing. So I think the rule one should be if you got to know what you're doing, you got to know what you're accomplishing, and you don't. That doesn't always mean you have to know the ending right away. But I think it does mean that you need to know either what your story structure is right away, or you need to know what the theme or the message or the central idea of what you're writing is. And if you don't know either of those things, then I don't think you're just hitting keys. You're just wasting time.
Well, hit the keys, waste your time, especially if you want to be a writer. Don't be afraid to sit in front of the monitor and do your work,
Yeah,
regardless. I mean,
yeah,
just regardless,
that's
get
true.
yourself there.
They say that you're as long as you're walking, you're lapping everyone sitting on the bench. So,
Yeah.
some for some people, I think it's very true to say that as long as you're hitting keys, you're at least. They
Just get
say that
motivated. Yeah, definitely. Just get
some people they
motivated.
say
Do it. Don't
just
talk
writing,
about it. Just do it.
just filling the page can be a lot of people's process is just just start hitting keys and
A
hope it's
nice philosophy that people say is you can't edit something that isn't there. I mean, as long as you have a sentence, you can edit it. You can work on it. You can develop it. I mean,
yes.
it's very gratifying to do the work once you're got something to work on.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
what is my last question for you? Is I mean, we can go on Reddit right now and we can find Sigma Echo is your username on Reddit, right? Where this is
Yeah,
posted,
that's my handle. Well, that's my
and
username handle.
that's your handle on Reddit, and that's where they could read
Well, I would
all that you've written on Star Wars.
I recommend find the sub. It's the sub is called Prequels SE. Uh,
Okay,
so I think that's probably
prequels.
the
I see.
easiest way to find it. Is just to find the sub. It's just as long as there's two S's in Prequels SE, and you should find it. The other
Perfect.
way,
And is
the other
there
way to
any place else that you want people to go to get to know you as an artist or to get to know your work? Are you on
uh,
Wattpad or
I think
Facebook, Twitter, something like that?
nope. At some point, I'm probably
Okay.
gonna have to set up a website for this project, but at this point, no, I don't. I it was a conscious decision to set up a subreddit that would make it easier for anybody who has a Reddit account can just subscribe to the subreddit and get updates for the project.
Okay.
The other way to easily find it is to just Google fixing the prequels or fixing the Star Wars prequels. Either one should give you, it should still be the first top post if you Google that. But
Is there anything or any way that people can contact you with questions or comments about the project or actually contribute ideas?
yeah, I'd love it if people would contact me through Reddit. I've been
Oh,
getting a
Reddit.
lot
Okay.
of comments and direct messages from people who've seen it. I would love if more people could find it on Reddit, and I'm pretty available on there. And I'm really hoping that more people find the project because it's going to take a lot more eyeballs to get the project to go anywhere at this point. I'm going to need way more people to see it, and then only then do I have any hope of attracting artists to the project.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're doing this, man, and I look forward to seeing how it's developing, and I look forward to having more conversations with you about it, and writing and film and all that good stuff as well. So I'll definitely be reaching out to you to get you back on the podcast into the future.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Um,